Hello and welcome to 6 Part. Today I'm gonna continue the story What If Deku Was the Flash Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Since it was Thursday and the sports festival was just a few days away, Mina and Izuku had made the decision to skip training for the day. Mina suggested that they spend the time at the beach, have a picnic, and generally unwind after getting in touch with a few of the others. Mina and Izuku arrived early and marveled at their handiwork. Izuku pointed to several dozen trash cans and then at some of the signs that said there would be a steep fine for anyone who threw their trash there, saying, "It seems the locals are keeping it clean." Leaning heavily against Izuku, Mina remarked, "I was a bit worried about that. Sometimes there are those that just do not care about the environment." His chin rested on her right shoulder and his arms were wrapped around her front. They had arrived early for some alone time as well as to make sure the beach was still clean. They must have been exhausted at home because his mother and both of her parents would frequently show up out of the blue to check on the two to make sure they weren't acting inappropriately. This struck Mina as odd because she had just spent the night with Izuku 2 days prior and intended to do so again as soon as possible. She enjoyed cuddling with him because it made her feel safer and more at ease than she had ever experienced. She grinned as she turned to face him. Izuku laughed as she continued, "Too bad we have the others coming. This could be a really great date." Even though he had to concur with her logic, Izuku said, "It was your idea," stating that you want to keep in touch with the others. She wished to strengthen their bonds with some of the others and turn them into friends rather than just classmates. She was a strong proponent of forming friendships with her classmates, but she was also aware that Izuku had no true friends at his previous school, so this was a completely new opportunity for him. Then, they both saw that a few of the others were simply entering the beach. Eijiro Kirishima, Momo Yaoyorozu, Kyokajiro, Ochako Uraraka, and Shoto Todoroki. Mina's phone rang as they approached, and she announced the other people she had invited. For different reasons, none of them were able to attend. Mina pointed to the picnic basket and said, "I guess you guys are it. Well, we can still hang out and... Anyone up for lunch?" In order to show that they had brought food as well, Momo and Kyoka hefted 2 additional baskets upward. Reluctantly, Izuku let her go, and the two of them sat down as the others joined. Momo pulled out a large thermos and then several teacups and said, "I brought golden leaf tea," giving them each a cup and filling it with hot tea. Soon, sandwiches and other food were distributed. Mina glanced at her boyfriend before turning back to him. She took a deep breath. Mina pouted a little and Kyoka laughed when she said, "Hey, just because we do not know each other that well yet does not mean that... Well, this is not a school function. We can talk and do more than just eat." Biting into her sandwich, Kyoka said, "She is right, you know. We are in the same class and we all want to become heroes. We have to have more in common than that." Kyoka then turned to face the other students. They all seemed to relax. The group finally started talking to one another after she made the suggestion, "Let's enjoy ourselves and go from there." When Kirishima arrived, Mina was a little taken aback by how little he spoke to either her or Izuku. Rather, her final school friend showed up and didn't seem like himself. He kept to himself. When she saw it, he turned to face Kyoka and let out a quiet sigh. He looked away after biting his lower lip. Mina wrinkled her brow and whispered to herself, "Whoa. He has a thing for Kyoka." It was implied that Kyoka preferred girls over boys. She felt sorry for him and shook her head. He had chosen the girl he had no chance with out of all the ones he could have a crush on. She had noticed Kyoka gazing affectionately at Izuku, which somewhat perplexed her. She had a suspicion that Toru did the same, just like Momo. But right then, she was more concerned with finding out whether or not the rumors were real. Therefore, she would need to set up some time for the purple-tinted-haired girl to spend alone. As the others started to get up from the picnic table, she said, "Hey Izzy, why don't you show them all the docs? I am sure they will like to see them." She then turned to face Kyoka. Kyoka nodded when she said, Kyoka, could we, talk a minute?" when Izuku and the others were sufficiently distant. Mina shook her head in response to Kyoka's question, "Is there something wrong, Mina?" Mina, who was not known for having a shortage of words, felt silly and a little irritated at herself when she said, "No, not really. Well, I actually do not know how to ask this. Well, I have heard. It is only a rumor and if I am out of line please tell me." Yet here she was. However, anyone would be if they were going to inquire about their sexual preferences from someone they didn't even know well yet. Kyoka let out a sharp sigh. Mina's bewildered expression made Kyoka feel ashamed. Is this the rumor going around that I want to seduce Midoriya? All I said to Toru was that I thought he was hot. That I would not mind. Oh. You have not heard that one. Oops. Mina questioned whether it would be safe to leave Izuku alone with Kyoka going forward after saying, "No, I have not." That actually answers the one that I heard about you. I guess it is wrong. When she first heard that rumor, she thought Kyoka would be the only girl in the class she could rely on to stay off Izuku. She was ready to stop believing any of them now. Kyoka shook her head and took a deep breath. That one. Oh, I know all about that one. The one that suggests that I am into girls rather than boys. I have no idea why everyone assumes that I am that way. I am not. I like boys. Kyoka said with a stern tone. She had previously been accused of being attracted to girls. She suspected it was because, unlike some of her friends from last school, she wasn't the kind to be overly girly or weak-willed. She had no intention of changing her appearance because she liked the way she dressed. I guess the rumor came out. I think Kaminari might have started it because he said that, well, that you kinda stared at Momo when she was topless. Mina said while Kyoka sighed. Even when Kaminari's brain was shorted out, she was unaware that he had noticed her gazing at Momo's well-endowed chest. Kyoka put her hands on her chest and moaned loudly, I did. Though it was more about envy. I mean, I am even envious of you. I got nothing in that regard. Mina laughed as she explained, I have seen fat boys with bigger. My mother is not as flat as I am. Mina grinned and Kyoka rolled her eyes in denial, saying, oh come on Kyoka. You are a major hottie even with smaller, ahems. Mina put her hands together and Kyoka shot back, yeah right. This time Kyoka laughed as she said possessively, you are. Now that I know you are into boys. I know a certain boy who I believe has a major crush on you. And no, it is not my Izzy. Sorry. He is mine. All mine and I do not share. Next, bite her lower lip. Mina shook her head when Kyoka asked, so who is it? Kyoka's earlobes started to tremble and move in annoyance as Mina told her, nope, not tellin'. But don't worry, it is not Kaminari or Mineta. Give me some time and he will gain the gusto to ask you out. Trust me. You won't be too disappointed. The others came back at that point, and Mina frowned at Momo. She believed that she was far too near him. She forced a smile as she asked, so how was the docs? Going back to training. Izuku pumped his fist in the air with a loud cry of triumph, and he grinned at Mina as she emerged from her home. Pointing to the plywood board he had leaned against the tree, he exclaimed, I did it. I actually did it. It had no holes in it and was in perfect condition. Mina clapped her hands together and squealed, I vibrated my hand through it. He nodded when Mina said, that is awesome Izzy. Can you do it again? He gently pushed his right hand through the board with a vibrating motion, then spun it around the whole 8 by 4 foot board, preventing any harm to it. He turned to face her as she asked, so what is next? Izuku told her, next I get my whole body to vibrate enough to pass through solid objects. Mina, who wasn't particularly excited about doing any more training, quietly exhaled, well, since it is still early. I will finish my coffee and then. However, Monday was drawing near, and both of them needed to complete as much training as they could before then. Returning indoors to fully awaken, she took a seat at the counter and took a sip of her coffee. In fact, she was excited about tonight. Online, there had been a rumor that Cartoon Network had discovered additional Rick and Morty episodes in the storage vaults and would be airing them tonight. The fact that all of these old episodes of various cartoons and anime were practically brand new to viewers amused her, despite the fact that they were all created in the past. In her reverie, Mina hardly noticed that her cup was empty when she attempted to take a sip. She got up and went upstairs to put on her workout attire. After completing his vibration experiments, Izuku leapt over the fence and made his way to the rear entrance. He knocked on the door and went inside, where Mina's mother was busy preparing breakfast. She gestured to one of the kitchen table chairs while grinning at Izuku. Then she set in front of him a plate of poached eggs on toast. Although he had already eaten breakfast, he would be happy to have another. While he was eating, he glanced at Mina's father, who was reading a newspaper that was held up. Keiko smiled down at him from the stove and asked, so what are you and Mina up to today? Putting 4 more poached eggs on a slice of toast after turning around to remove them from the poached egg maker. Izuku finished the 3rd poached egg and began the 4th, responding, nothing too strenuous. Mostly just some minor workout and then perhaps some finessing on our own ideas for the sports festival. He paled a little when Keiko said, oh, before I forget. 3 months from now is Mina's birthday. I bet she did not tell you. The period of time they had spent together, the rush of enrolling in UA, And everything else before and up to this point? He hadn't asked himself that question. He needed time to find the ideal birthday present that Mina would value and desire because she was so important to him. As Izuku finished his last poached egg, Mina bounded into the room and said, "Thank you, Keiko. I did not even know. That would have been bad if I did not get her something." Stalking over, the smiling bundle of excitement flopped sideways on his lap. When her mother put a plate in front of her, she sank in, placing her left arm over his shoulders. Her father complained loudly about her sitting on Izuku's lap while glancing over the top of his paper. Keiko laughed. Keiko said to her husband, "Let it go, Jin. I think it is cute." He complained once more, loudly flipped his paper, and resumed reading it. Mina chose to truly torture her father, grinning as she ate. She leaned over to give Izuku a firm hug and a loud peck on the cheek. Jin growled, trying not to think about what Izuku might be doing to his little girl. "Do you have to do that?" he asked. But his mind was troubled by memories of what he and Keiko had done when they were so young. Mina grinned and gave Izuku another cheek kiss. Mina laughed joyfully and her father let out another audible groan as she said, "Yep. Got to. I love him. So I got to kiss him once in a while." Her mother erupted in laughter. Mina waited and listened intently that night until she heard her father's characteristic snore. She stood up and put on her robe as soon as she heard it. She slipped downstairs, just in case her mother woke up. She hurried out and jumped the fence as soon as she reached the kitchen door leading outside. She crouched in the kitchen of the other house and crept upstairs, looking back to make sure no one from her house saw her. She paused just long enough to open the door to her boyfriend's bedroom and step inside. She let out a sigh of relief as she shut the door behind her and turned to face Izuku's sleeping body. She pulled up the sheet and lay down, removing her robe. She chose to spoon him from behind because he was on his left side. She positioned herself directly behind him, slipping her left arm beneath the pillow and covering him with her right. She positioned herself so that she was directly in front of him. He opened his eyes and woke up. She kissed his right cheek after he whispered, "Mina." He laughed when she said, "Yep. Were you expecting someone else to come snuggle with you tonight?" Izuku said, "Well, maybe Yaoyorozu," Mina snarled. Mina said sharply, "That ain't funny. You do realize that I am a very jealous person, right?" And Izuku laughed once more. Izuku told her, "Yeah. I know. You do know I would never. I am with the one I want and love." Mina grinned once more. She tightened her grip on him. Mina closed her eyes and gave a yawn. "Good answer. This feels so nice," she said. Izzy whispered into his ear, "Good night, Izzy. I love you." He took her right hand in his. Mina laughed as Izuku said, "Love you more," then calmed down, and she eventually dozed off. Because he could feel her braless, pajama-clad breasts pressing against his back, it took him longer to completely relax. Mina initially wanted to melt the alarm clock into a puddle when it started to buzz at 5:30 a.m. She had to wake up, though, or her parents would find out she wasn't in her room within an hour. With a heavy sigh of resignation, she got up and grabbed her robe as Izuku stood up to turn off the alarm. She nodded when he asked, "Is it today that you are going to the mall with Miyagi and Murasa?" Given that she hadn't spent much time with her two friends and didn't want to lose them as friends, Mina admitted to him, "I sort of neglected them a lot." Even though Mina was attending a completely different school and it would be normal for her to not want to spend a lot of time with them, Murasa said it was okay. Mina was upset about that and insisted on spending some time with him at the mall. Without her boyfriend present. Izuku shrugged when she asked, "So what are you going to do today without me around?" Izuku uttered the final words in a nervous whisper, "Well. Now don't get jealous. But. Ahem. Well, some of the others from class are going to get together at Yaoyorozu's." Mina gave him a narrowed look. He extended his hands in her direction. "It is nothing like that. She mentioned yesterday that she thought it would help if we all got together and discussed what possible events we might encounter. Almost the whole class is going to be there." He started sweating and Mina finally cracked a grin. A comforting, "It is all right, Izzy. I trust you," Mina said. She thought, got up, put her arms around his waist, and gave him a quick kiss, saying, "I just don't trust Momo, Toru, Ochako, Suyu or Kyoka or any other girl you come in contact with." Before she brushed her teeth and he brushed his, he didn't want to do much more than that. She gave him one last kiss on the lips before slipping out of the room and returning to her own home. She was lying on her bed when her parents' alarm went off. She waited for her mother to tell her it was time to wake up, pretending to sleep. The strategy meeting. When Izuku was able to run at half speed, he really enjoyed it and skidded to a stop. He had run the distance from his house to Yaoyorozu's in about 3 minutes. He chose not to risk upsetting Mina because he didn't see any of the others. He leaned back against the outer wall to wait for any of the others to arrive, laughing as he said, "Okay, I am afraid of her." Fortunately, the wait was short, but to his disappointment, Kyoka Jiro, Tsuyu Asui, and Toru Hagakure showed up. As they approached him, he could see that two of them gave him big smiles. Although he couldn't tell, he was speculating that Toru was. Tsuyu said, "Is anyone else here yet?" "Ribbit." Izuku shook his head. Kyoka took a sharp breath and glanced at her watch. Momo had organized for everyone to gather at her house around this time. She pondered whether the others would be attending. She finally let out a breath as she looked at the enormous mansion. Kyoka pointed up, and they all saw the video surveillance camera. "Well, we better go in. By now if I know Momo she has seen us on those video cameras and is panicking that we might just leave." With Toru and Tsuyu following, she took the lead and made her way to the gate. Izuku hesitated for a few seconds before following them. "I kept thinking that maybe this wasn't a good idea. That Mina would not be particularly happy about him spending time by himself with 4 of the class's girls. 4 very pretty girls." His concerns vanished as soon as he entered the main library. Momo used dry markers on a number of stencil boards that were positioned throughout the space. They included lists of their classmates' names and their peculiarities. Izuku took out and opened his notebook. Additionally, he had gathered some data about the quirks of each of his classmates. "We have no idea who the other students from UA are or their quirks. So we need to figure out a strategy that will allow us to adapt to any situation or possibility. Then there are the 3 events to determine the winner of the sports festival. You all know last year the 3 events consisted of an indoor maze, endurance race and finally the personal one-on-one challenge." She instructed them to write all of them on a white sheet of paper. Momo circled the last event, and Izuku added, "That last event is one they have each time. So it is only the first 2 we need to be concerned with." Izuku shook his head as Kyoka looked at him and said, "It does not matter what the events are. You are going to dominate the sports festival this year." Izuku stated, without informing them, that he had already thought of some ways to adjust to the majority of those in his class. "That is not for certain. I bet Yaoyorozu will figure out some way to limit my speed. Or how about that sound waves travel pretty fast? Or how do I even defeat someone that I cannot see? Or someone that has the abilities of a frog? But how is it possible for someone to adjust to a girl who can create anything she sets her mind to? She might invent a glue that would hold him in place. Then there was the girl who had the ability to emit sound waves, which, when they struck him at a high speed, would seriously impair his center of balance." He had spent hours trying to figure out some of them. But the people he was most concerned about were Momo and Kyoka. Each of the 4 girls gave him a smile. Izuku complained and turned back to his notebooks, saying, "Great. I basically just gave them ideas on how to defeat me during the personal challenge event." He hadn't disclosed to them which one he truly thought he would struggle with. Mina. She was fully aware of his strategies and skills. He was aware that she had by now developed a number of potential strategies to get around and outpace his speed using her acid quirk. Momo proposed and started writing each event on a different whiteboard, saying, "Okay. Let's move on. There are, from what I heard, 26 different events that can be chosen from. I have the list here. I think it might be best that we discuss each one and come up with a strategy for each one." Momo stopped writing when Toru said, "The question is, do we pass this on to those that decided not to come?" Kyoka frowned and said, "If someone asks, then yes. Otherwise if they do not ask, we do not just give it to them." The notion that the 5 of them would complete all of this work and then simply hand it off to the others did not sit well with her. However, she assumed that Momo and Izuku would likely insist on sharing the details with the others. To avoid coming across as a complete bitch, she suggested that they easily supply it to the others. Momo called the butler to bring tea and sandwiches after working for 2 more hours. Izuku choked on the tea he had just started to drink as Toru asked gleefully, "Now that we are done with that, Su Midoriya, have you and Mina done it yet?" I looked at her with wide eyes and saw that everyone else was waiting for him to respond. He felt faint and his face went pale. Kyoka smirked and said, from his lack of an answer and the fact that he looks like he is about to pass out, "They have not." She had anticipated that Momo would be upset with them for bringing up such a private matter. However, she had a sneaking suspicion that her well-endowed friend was also curious. "Personally, I got to know what is the hold-up. You two have been, from what Mina has told me, together for quite a while. Got to figure that by now you both should be at least thinking about it." Izuku continued to blush. Feeling the strong urge to simply run away, But even at 1/10 speed, he couldn't move from where he was sitting. He couldn't even try to use his vibration trick because there were too many obstacles in his path. Not as anxious and distracted as he was. He would do some serious harm if he did. He was practically stranded there. The shopping center. Marasa held up a skirt and matching blouse and remarked, "You know, Mina, I am actually surprised that you came with us at all." Then she wrinkled her nose and held it against her. Miyagi was observing another ensemble with the same contempt off to one side. They had spent the last hour searching for the ideal ensemble after entering a bargain outlet store. At most, they have been completely disappointed thus far. Mina picked up a miniskirt and asked, "Why is that?" She wished it was a different color. It would have been ideal otherwise. Miyagi pulled out an incredibly short miniskirt and grinned as she said, "Well, with you having a boyfriend and all. That and being at UA. We both figured you did not have time to hang out with us." The other girl grudgingly put it back after Mina said, "Niga, if you wore that, your dad would have a heart attack." The other two grinned as she said, "I apologize for not being around, but I barely have time to be with Izuku as much as I would like. And go to class. But I will try to go out with you guys when I can." All three girls laughed when Marasa said, "Good. Though next time bring him with you. If nothing else he could carry our shopping bags." Mina had to agree with Marasa's statement as she hefted 3 of her bags and spent the next 5 hours shopping. A pack mule would be ideal for Izuku. The old and young had come and were standing high on one of the stadium's walls, dressed similarly, in essence, hiding in the dark. The young protege and future Flash asked, "Is this? This is when?" Her great-grandmother grinned at her. The old woman looked down at the field through her binoculars once more and said, "Yes, Meisha, this is the first sports festival that one more will teach you on what it means to follow our lineage. This is when your great-great-grandfather shone above all the others, including your great-great-grandmother." Pro heroes and spectators crowded the stands surrounding the stadium. In order to avoid being found, Inko and Izuku stood apart. Izuku was able to envelop them in mists by using his mother's quirk, so they would never be seen. The electronic detection devices were disabled while Inko used her father's quirk. With a gesture toward and away from the stadium, Inko said, "Looks like they are about to start. Are we staying, grandmother, or?" The oldest woman gave a headshake. The old woman sat down and leaned back against the wall, saying, "I need a few more moments to gather my strength. So I guess we can at least watch the first event." The last time she had run at full force level speed was years ago. She was exhausted every time. After a little while, the other three sat down and started eating high-calorie power bars from their utility pouches. Refueling. The sports festival. As Toru grumbled about having to wear the gym uniforms instead of their hero uniforms, Mina laughed and pulled on her school gym clothes. Mina said, "Oh, so you want to go out there naked, Toru?" And Toru gasped when she realized that her hero uniform was just gloves and sneakers. Toru said calmly, "No. Maybe going in our gym uniforms might not be that bad after all." No one could see her blush or worry that there might be someone watching on TV or in the stands who could actually see her. Look her up and down. According to what the school support section had informed her, she was constantly worried about that. They wouldn't have enough of her hair to make her new invisible uniform for at least 6 months. She had to go nude until then. When she pulled her jacket's zipper all the way up, the other girls in the room were all laughing. Mina exhaled softly, feeling better. She was prepared for anything that came up because the general tension had been reduced. Mina shook her head when Momo asked, "Are you still worried about if you have to go up against Midoriya?" Mina put on her specially made sneakers and said, "No, not really. I told him to go all out if that happens, though I hope that it does not happen." Izuku handed her the notes from the strategy session he and a few others had conducted, and she picked them up. After looking through them for a few minutes, she returned them to her locker. The other girls in the room started to fidget and displayed signs of nervousness as well. Their aspirations to become fully realized heroes in the future depended on this incident. There was no room for failure or coming in last. As the brown-haired girl hurried into the bathroom, Ochako exclaimed, "God, I got to pee," and everyone relaxed enough to laugh once more. Hyoka and Tsuyu soon followed, both of whom unexpectedly felt the same impulse. Izuku paced nervously back and forth in the Class 1A boys' locker room. He did it at a higher speed without even recognizing it. Izuku paused to look down as Shoto Todoroki said, Midoriya. You are about to put a groove into the floor." Where he had been pacing, the floor's tiles were worn, so he sat down heavily on the bench with a shuddering breath. Izuku asked, "The waiting is? How much longer before?" Tenya looked at the wall clock. Tenya put 2 more pairs of glasses in his jacket pocket and said, "We can go out in about 10 more minutes." He was worried that he might at least shatter the one he was wearing. Everyone in the locker room had watched past sports festivals with complete awe. They were all aware that one of the most draining exhibitions of their lives was about to take place. One that would challenge their mental resolve in addition to their physical stamina. Overall, everyone had their own interests in mind. The class president declared, "It is time." The 14 boys then proceeded to the arena. First event. The race. All of Class 1A and some members of Class 1B who were aware of Izuku's powers turned to watch him when Nomori Kayama announced the event. A few of them complained inaudibly. Izuku could only smile and shrug. Mina lightly bumped into him with her shoulder as he was walking to the starting line. "Don't go as fast as you can. Otherwise no one will be able to see you actually do it. Otherwise get it done and let them up there be impressed," she suggested, and Izuku gave a nod. He could run the race in a heartbeat. Mina was right. He was moving so quickly that he would only be seen at the starting line and the finish line. He needed to be seen because this was his day to flaunt himself. Izuku ran at roughly 500 or 600 miles per hour, navigating the obstacle course and avoiding the towering trap robots with ease. He was aware that he was only a blurred streak to the people who were most likely watching him on the TV monitors. The sand sort of split into 2 long waves as he got to it. Pointing to the spot where he came across it, as he got closer to the edge, he looked back and saw the round landmines. None of them had even activated because he had passed over them so quickly. He paused as he crossed the finish line and glanced up at Nomori Kayama, who gaped at him. She checked her stopwatch and let out a loud laugh. First place goes to Izuku Midoriya. Completely the course in," she said. It took a few seconds before someone from the stands clapped, and then more people joined in. Under 12 seconds. Izuku looked up into the stands and saw a number of pro heroes writing frantically in their notebooks. He hoped that the writing was positive. Mina ran among some of the other members of Class 1A, keeping a respectable pace. She jumped over one of the arm sections of a trap robot, landed, and went on. She got ahead of some of the other UA competitors by going over rather than around like most did. She grinned as she arrived at the canyons lined with thick, long metal wires. She stepped down on one of the cables and slid across with appropriate ease, whispering, "Time to skate." Others were cautiously walking the tightropes, which slowed them down when she got to the other side. She said, breathing heavily now, "I may not come in. One of the top 10. But I will be close it." She might have been unable to continue running by this point before she became involved with Izuku. However, he had assisted her in increasing her endurance. As she got closer to the sand, she halted in time to see a stranger from a different class enter a mine and be fearlessly launched into the air. She smirked and threw a veil of acid in front of her before moving across the sands a little more slowly. Her acid veil exploded 10 feet away from her each time it struck a mine, pelting her with sand, but she managed to cross without incident and then sprint all the way to the finish line. Arriving shortly after Fumikare Tokiyami and Tsuyu. She gasped for breath, bending over and putting her hands on her knees. Then someone offered her a cup of water. When she looked up, Izuku was grinning at her. Taking the cup and downing it, Izuku said, 17th place. Not bad. She glared at him, and he stifled a laugh as he looked at her. He pointed at Mina as she asked sharply, "What?" She finally looked at herself after Izuku told her, "You are completely covered in sand." Sand and dirt were all over her clothes. She felt the grit caked on her face and touched it. At last, she combed her hair and observed the waterfall of dirt and sand. Hopefully before the next event. "I have time to take a shower." Mina frowned. She suspected that she was perspiring because she disliked being unclean. She said, "I must look disastrous." Izuku grinned broadly and shook his head. Izuku whispered, "You never looked. You always look beautiful." Mina grinned back at him. She wished she could give him a more tangible thank you for that remark. Instead, she started to head for the girls' locker room after hearing that there would be a 30-minute break. He nodded when Mina said, "I will meet up with you over at the food court after I get cleaned up and we will get something to eat." In the locker room, she discovered Momo and Ochako essentially carrying out her plan. Momo ran the shower nozzle over herself and said, "I can't believe that they allowed Mineta to. He cheated." Ohako was doing the same thing over at another small seat. As Mina took another nozzle and sat down on another spool, the well-endowed girl said, "Oh hey Mina." She sprayed her hair and herself. When Ochako finished washing her hair, she remarked, "I guess they ruled that it was acceptable since he did cross the finish line. Not in the most honest way possible." But he did cross it. She got up, picked up a towel, and wrapped it around her body. Momo did the same a minute later, and Mina did the same after that. They all went to their lockers to change into new gym attire. Momo objected, looking at her uniform jacket, which still had 2 of his sticky balls on it. Yeah, but he rode on my back to do it. Mina said, maybe in one of the next events. You might be able to get some type of revenge against him. Momo grinned while she said this. She hoped her friend was correct. Izuku filled one tray to the brim and set a few carefully chosen items on another outside the food court. He was aware of Mina's preferences and had a sneaking suspicion that she wasn't particularly hungry. When he took a seat to wait for her, Kaminari and Mineta walked by. Izuku stood and blurred in front of them after hearing a few tidbits of what they intended to say while they were both whispering about something. Both came to a halt and gazed at him with wide eyes. Izuku laughed and leaned in closer. Listen. If you are planning to actually do what I just overheard, then it better not involve Mina. Otherwise. Denki went pale as Minoru looked up at Izuku and swallowed hard. You both might end up stripped naked and left. Let's say in the middle of the business district. Denki leaned down and hurriedly said, It was just a passing thought. Perhaps a joke. Nothing more than that. He then ushered his shorter companion away from Izuku. Looked up at his friend, Mineta said. Okay, there goes tricking Yaoyorozu and the others into dressing up as cheerleaders. Mineta smirked and turned to face Izuku before saying, Why? Oh, I doubt that he would do that. If he did, he would get into so much trouble. They saw that their green-haired classmate was observing them with a severe expression, pointing first at his eyes and then at them both. He would be observing them, he said. He shook his head and swallowed once more. The 2 class perverts kept talking about it and were unable to think of anything that would not include Mina. Okay, let's think up something that does not involve a Shido. Maybe something that does not piss off someone that can drop us off somewhere naked in a blink of an eye. Izuku could not wait any longer after making the I am watching you gesture to the 2 perverts. He was going hungry. He grabbed an eclair and shoved it into his mouth. Momo, Kyoka, Ochako, and Mina all sat down at that precise moment. Shoto and Eijiro then joined them. She grinned as he pushed a tray he had gotten for Mina over in front of her. She picked up a banana and peeled it, saying, Thank you, Izzy. It can be viewed on YouTube at some point this week. You know, tonight they're bringing out the next episode of Monster Girl Doctor. The Hedonistic Arachne. Momo added, and Kyoka and Ochako nodded and grinned. That is what I heard, ever since you told me about that anime. I have not missed an episode. Following Mina's advice, they were also watching the series. Momo looked over at Izuku. Mina asked him, Izzy, do you think the character Safi is pretty? And Izuku swallowed hard. Everybody's eyes were on him, and he saw that the majority of them were either smirking or holding back their laughter. The classic movie was the first thing that came to mind. Star Wars. The Return of the Jedi. Admiral Akbar's summary of his situation was the only line that sprang to mind. It is a trap. So by that, he was trapped. He might as well commit suicide if he were foolish enough to tell her that. Yes, Safi is pretty, as Mina would make him regret it. She would accuse him of lying if he said no. He needed to figure out how to save himself. Aside from running for it, Eijiro and Kyoka both started laughing at him because they were unable to control themselves any longer. I thought it was funny that Mina had effectively placed him in the hot seat. Momo, on the other hand, thought it was amusing but also thought it might present a chance. This could be the beginning of the end for Izuku and Mina's relationship if he gave the incorrect response. She had witnessed it previously with a friend from her former school. They finally broke up after a small argument got out of hand. One of her other friends was interested in the boy, but she wasn't. Swooped in to get involved with the boy after using the circumstances to inflame the two's dissatisfaction. She questioned whether she could really accomplish that because, among other reasons, it would put an end to her and Mina's developing friendship. Additionally, it might split the class, with some wanting to stay friends with Mina and others wanting to be friends with both her and Izuku. Before she took any action, she needed to consider this. Maybe don't interfere with it and let it dissolve naturally. Then start a conversation between Izuku and herself. Izuku was in a panic, but Mina was grinning mischievously at him, awaiting his response. A few moments later, he grinned. Izuku sighed in relief and said, Yes, she is. But not as pretty as you are. By some miracle, he had managed to escape the ambush. With a laugh, Mina took his hand and squeezed it lightly. Still grinning at him, Mina said softly, Good answer. The others all chuckled. Mina grinned at Ochako when he said, You know Mina, that was mean. Trapping him like that. Izuku sighed in relief as Mina repeated, just keeping him on his toes. I actually was not going to be upset if he did not come up with such a good answer. I just wanted to tease him a bit. She was going to ask Izuku if he thought Momo was prettier than she was, but she wasn't going to tell any of them. Or if the other girl appealed to him. But concluded that saying the other was or even attempting to deny it might cause issues. Their relationship might end as a result of the tiny spark of jealousy she would experience growing into a raging fire. She had a feeling that some of her classmates wouldn't object. She already thought that Momo or Toru might want to comfort Izuku before pursuing a relationship with him. She needed to exercise caution. Izuku asked, should I expect more traps like that? Mina leaned in close to him and squeezed his hand once more. Izuku thought about running for it again when Mina said, maybe. Only though if I believe that you might have a wandering fascination for someone else. Then of course I am going to test you. The spectators, Meisha said, lowering her binoculars. He won that event, great-grandmother. Rather easily. The elder woman grinned, then scowled. Her desire to visit her parents was still strong. To give them a hug and express her love and longing for them. However, that would radically alter the timeline and possibly result in a paradox. To find out that the two were not only together but would eventually get married. However, their daughter continued her father's legacy. As well as her children, her brother's children, their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren. It's best to keep some things hidden. According to Inko, who was staring at a tiny computer monitor on her right wrist, grandmother. When we do depart we might want to be further away. I think he might have sensed us the last time. After she had set it up to detect Speed Force energy waves, a wave flowed outward after they had slipped into the time stream. Which, if they knew what senses they were, anyone with access to the Speed Force would be able to detect. It would take another decade or so for the original speedster to discover what he was feeling. The eldest woman returned to observing her parents through her binoculars after saying, okay. When we depart for the next juncture that Meisha needs to see. We will be further away before we slip into the time stream. After that, she panned over to see Uncle Eijiro, Uncle Shoto, Aunt Kyoka, Aunt Ochako, and Aunt Momo. All five resembled adoptive aunts and uncles. She was still familiar with them, though. There were others, of course, but she was unable to see any of them down there. The one-on-one challenge would follow shortly after the next event. According to her, the youngest of them reached into a pouch, took out an advanced earwig, and tuned it down towards a specific hallway. Oh, here comes a critical moment. One that we will need to use the audio enhancer. So that you can overhear when he is confronted by Shoto Todoroki. The meeting. Izuku left Mina and the others behind and made his way to the locker room via one of the hallways. He had indeed filled himself, but he now needed to switch to a different pair of reinforced sneakers. The soles of the ones he now wore were devoid of traction. Reinforced clothing and footwear could be provided by the support department, but their usefulness would be limited. They even appeared to be worn down over time by the energy and friction he released. He had discussed the energy with Powerloader, who informed him that it included both kinetic and static electricity. He would need to speak with renowned scientist David Shields to find out more. Izuku told himself, like that could happen. He realized he wasn't alone as he got closer to the locker room. He had been followed by Shoto. Shoto Todoroki motioned for Izuku to follow him, saying, I need to talk to you. There is something we need to discuss. He nodded and decided to change his sneakers later, following the other person. The dual quirk user took a sharp breath after being left alone outside the stadium. Presenting Izuku with a folder bearing his name. As Izuku opened the folder and discovered page after page of information about him, Shoto remarked, my father had some investigators and analysts research you. He believes that at some point during the sports festival that we would face each other and he wanted me to have an advantage in that confrontation. He started to laugh after reading a portion of it. Shoto shook his head when Izuku asked, did you read this? Or are you planning on using this? Izuku threw the folder in the trash after Shoto said, no. For one, I do not want my father's help. Another reason I will not is that I do not want any type of advantage or strategy compiled by some of my father's cronies. Not so much as to destroy it. Izuku laughed once more as he said, shouldn't you destroy that? Someone might find and use that against you. Wish someone would. From what I could tell, none of your father's investigators or analysts actually know what I can do. All that is conjecture and assumptions. Like the fact that it is their belief that limited confined spaces and areas limit my abilities. Izuku said, and Shoto laughed as well. On the first day of training with All Might, He had been present when Izuku was essentially confined inside the building. Bakugo and Ochako were defeated by the speedster with relative ease, even in the constrained spaces. Thus, his father's money had been essentially squandered by his father's analysts and investigators. He found that very funny. At some point I need to tell him that his valued analysts and investigators are idiots. That they gave me information that is basically useless. That will really upset him, Shoto said with an enormous grin on his face. He then turned to face Izuku. Izuku shook his head as he resolutely stated, regardless, I still plan on defeating you with my own strategies that I have compiled. I need to prove that I can defeat you with only my ice. For I refuse to use my fire since it comes from him. Izuku kept shaking his head, and Shoto took a sharp breath. From what I can tell, you can't with just your ice. Shoto. You need to use both and all of your quirk. Go all out. Otherwise. Then made the decision to explain to Izuku why he refused to use his fire. The whole twisted story that scarred him. Izuku made the decision to share his past with Shoto. Shoto gestured back inside after saying, I guess we both have fucked up pasts. They both returned inside after he said, it is almost time for them to announce the second event. Unaware that Shoto's father had secretly listened to the entire conversation. From where he had been listening, he emerged and gave a fierce growl. After removing the folder from the trash, he snarled and set it on fire. Nomori Kayama was about to announce the next event when they all walked back inside the stadium arena to rejoin the others. She turned to face the huge monitor, cracked her whip, and then laughed joyfully. Over the loudspeakers, she announced, the next event is the Chariot race. A few minutes later, the present mic informed the students as well as the spectators in the stands and those watching on television. Izuku grinned at his girlfriend as Mina said, count me in on being on your team, Izzy. She looked around, trying to think of someone who could assist and benefit them, and said, now we just need to find 2 others to join us. Particularly considering that Izuku's pointer band was the highest. She smiled as she saw someone who would be very helpful in this task, and she went to recruit Ochako Uraraka to join them. As Mina was doing that, Izuku was approached by someone else. Bakugo commanded, Deku. IAM. You are going to be part of a team. Izuku grinned as he said, do not even consider declining. I need you to decimate and win this. If you even try to say no, I will kill you. Izuku said, all right. But we do it my way and what I say goes, Kachan. Bakugo snarled and nodded briefly. Mina and Ochako arrived just then. She was going to say something when she saw Bakugo, but she chose to hold off. Bakugo questioned, all right Deku. How are we doing this? And Izuku presented his plan to the 4 of them. The adversary chuckled. He exclaimed, fucking brilliant. Let's do that. Before grinning slyly at the other groups. Mina frowned as she watched from the left side as Izuku lifted Ochako and sat him on his back. She was filled with jealousy and kept mumbling and complaining. Bakugo laughed over on the right as she sternly warned the brunette, I am warning you, don't get any funny ideas, Ochako. Bakugo demanded to know exactly what Izuku was planning, asking, alright so now what? He grinned as he turned to face the hostile former friend. Izuku made sure everyone understood their roles by telling them, the plan is simple. You and Mina will keep any of the others from coming up from the sides to get the number banned. Uraraka is the last line of defense. If they get past you, she will make them regret it. By making them weightless. Izuku was about to respond when Ochako said, why don't you just go too fast for any of them to get close? But Mina spoke up first. He can't. There would be no way me or Bakugo could hold on. At most he probably can only go maybe at most 60 or 70 miles per hour, Mina replied. Bakugo responded this time to Ochako's suggestion that, I could make you too weightless and then he could really floor it. Bakugo said, rather politely for him, that won't work. At most it would bog Deku down and while me and the alien chick are floating. We can't blast someone that gets too close. Izuku was quite perplexed by this. He would have anticipated verbally reprimanding Ochako and calling her a derogatory name. However, he wasn't as antagonistic as he usually is. Izuku growled something disagreeable under his breath and remarked, Kachan is right. Sure I could go faster. But at some point the drag from him and Mina would slow me down or they could lose their grips and float off. Resulting in us being disqualified. When the 4 of them looked around, they saw that the majority of the other people were staring at them. More significantly, Ochako was wearing a band. Since it was the most valuable point band for this event, they all desired it. Bakugo had to give his for finishing second to the person in front of him, who then gave his to the person behind him, and so on. Bakugo grinned sinisterly and exclaimed, we are going to fuck. Freaking kill this. Mina and Izuku stared at him in complete bewilderment. Izuku tried to come up with a possible explanation. Okay, now I am not only confused, but also, what would stop Kachan from swearing? However, Mina was aware of what would cause a boy to undergo a radical personality transformation. A female. She had a suspicion that a certain egotistical, short-tempered jackass had a thing for a shy, timid girl named Ochako Uraraka. Zero Bakugo roared loudly and threw a massive blast at the team, which included Momo Yayorozu, Shoto Todoroki, Eijiro Kirishima, and Fumikare Tokiyami. Sitting on Kirishima's back, Momo struck the 2-foot circular shields she had made for herself and others. Additionally, she made them for Shoto, who was on the right, and Tokiyami, who was on the left. Shoto tries to ice the ground beneath Izuku's feet at the same moment. The strategies of their team were fairly obvious. Avoiding Mina and staying to the side where Bakugo was. Izuku commanded, Mina. Kachan. Hop on the count of 3 and then hold on tight. He counted. 1, 2, 3. Hop. Both of them exclaimed, and he streaked a good 40 meters to the left while they were momentarily in midair, putting them well out of the opposing team's reach. Ochako looked up at the time clock and said, 2 minutes. 0.37 seconds to go. She then turned back to the other teams. Tenya Iida, Yuga Aoyama, Mahirao Ojiro, and, for some reason, a girl Izuku did not recognize made up the team. We were occupied stealing point bands from other people. They had done that to the first team, which was made up of Tsuyu Asui, Minoru Mineta, and Mezzo Shoji. The pervert tossed his band to the pink-haired girl after she merely showed Mineta her cleavage. It wasn't the most truthful strategy, but it was effective. He turned back to their own situation and saw that other teams were now closing in on them, preventing them from going on to the next event in order to obtain the large point value band. The one-on-one contest. Bakugo yelled, "Do that again, Deku," and gave him the order to move quickly and briefly once more to get out of range of the people swarming toward them. Izuku looked around and took a deep breath. Where? Izuku asked, indicating each of the 3 possible routes they could take without leaving the arena. The only way Izuku could accomplish that again would be to intentionally run straight into one of the 3 directions that nearly all of the other teams were approaching from. It was too likely that one of them would be able to get their point band, particularly if the other was prepared for that kind of move. There was only one thing he could do. Bakugo demanded, "Well, do something," and Izuku smiled at him wryly. Izuku watched and made sure they followed his instructions. Okay. All of you pull your t-shirts over your mouths and noses. Then close your eyes. This is going to be interesting. Then he raised his right hand. Above them, he whirled his arm and hand around rapidly. Soon, a tiny funnel formed, sending dirt and sand flying in all directions, preventing the others from seeing them at all. After a short while, he stopped his arm, and grit, sand, and dirt fell from the sky. Hop again, he exclaimed, and as they did, he merged between 2 teams from a distance of several meters. Again, they were well away from all of them. Just as the timer reached 0, Izuku looked up and grinned, declaring, "That was my last trick." His team managed to hold onto the high point band after the event ended. Zero Mina grimaced as she looked down at herself as she left the arena again. She whispered to Izuku, who was remarkably clean once more, got to take another shower. However, it appeared that she, Ochako, and even Bakugo were entirely covered in dirt, sand, and grime. They went back to the locker room with Ochako to take a shower and change into clean uniforms. Bakugo roared, "I got sand in places that, erg," and rushed to the boys' locker room to repeat the action. But paused right at the room's entrance. He said as he entered the locker room, "We need to talk after I get done. There is something." "Do not go anywhere." Izuku took a quiet breath. Izuku was usually left bleeding and burned the few times Bakugo attempted to speak with him in the past. Even though that was not possible right now, he was still a little uneasy. It is impossible to fully forget what it was like to be hurt and tormented. No matter how hard he tried to forget those unpleasant memories, they remained. To confront those anxieties, they would never leave. Bakugo came back before he was truly prepared. The other person pointed to one of the doors leading outside the stadium and said, "Outside." Bakugo glared outside to make sure no one was around. Izuku clenched his fists and took a deep breath. Izuku said firmly, and his former friend shook his head, I am not fighting you, Kachan, and I am not running. If that is the reason you wanted me to come out here, then I am going back inside." Izuku let out an audible gasp as Bakugo whispered, "That is not." I need your advice. Staring with wide eyes at him. Bakugo gritted his teeth in response to Izuku's question. What? Wait, did you just say you need my advice? Bakugo looked around to make sure no one had overheard the conversation. Yes. Do not think for a minute that I cannot handle this myself. But you are the only one out of the whole group of know-nothings. Extras in our class that you and the alien chick are together and have been for a while. Bakugo was tempted to tell Izuku to go fuck himself when he said, first, her name is Ashido to you. Second, do not ever refer to the others in our class as know-nothings or extras. However, he refrained from speaking and gave a slight nod. Growling, Bakugo exclaimed, fine, you and her are together. You are a couple, before inhaling deeply. I take it that you and I do have come to an understanding about the personal one-on-one challenge. Izuku pursed his lips. The idea of fighting his girlfriend did not exactly excite Izuku, and he suspected Mina was feeling the same way. Yes, we have. And we both have agreed to do our best. Not that we want to fight each other. But we both will not hold back. Bakugo closed his eyes as he asked, why do you even care? Bakugo grimaced and said, my first challenge fight is against. He repeated most of what he had just said in a whisper, Uraraka. And I am concerned that I do not want to hurt her. Izuku was simultaneously shocked and stunned. Izuku exclaimed in shock, you like Uraraka? Bakugo gave him a fierce look. His twisted face then softened, and he nodded slowly. Izuku was blown away by that. That person, who was usually antagonistic, was his one-time tormentor. Genuinely had feelings for someone. Bakugo scowled at him and said, talk about complete opposites. Bakugo asked angrily, his fingers crackling with tiny explosions, what do you mean by that? Izuku laughed. You and Uraraka are complete opposites. She is timid, kind and well a really nice person. While you Kachan are. To sum it up, you are a complete asshole. An egotistical, self-absorbed asshole. Izuku said as Bakugo continued to glare and then averted your gaze. Bakugo looked down at the ground and bit his lower lip as he nervously asked, all I want to know is, do you think she will hate me? If I should I? Do I not fight her? Not go full out against her? Izuku gave a headshake. She will hate you more if you go easy on her and she finds out you did. She will go all out against you. You need to respect her enough to do the same. As for getting hurt, that is all part of becoming a hero. Izuku said to him and Bakugo took a sharp. After saying, you tell anyone Deku. What I will kill you. Bakugo hurried back inside without giving Izuku a sidelong glance. The fact that Bakugo actually acknowledged liking someone and being worried about hurting her left him speechless for a few minutes. He wanted to tell Mina, but he went back inside. She took his hand before he could, pulling him in the direction of the monitors by the food court. Mina pointed to the nearby board that displayed the opponents for the first round of challenge fights and said, I get to fight Aoyama in the first round. Look, you get to go up against Todoroki. You can watch the first 2 episodes of Monster Girl Doctor at wcostream.com, playlist cat, Monster Girl Doctor or search for watch anime dub. It will be in English. To the readers. I will be changing some of the fights and who will be fighting who. I will also be changing who wins certain rounds. The first fight was about to start and it was Tenya Iida versus Mei Hatsume. Izuku suggested, let's go watch. They both went up to the Class 1A box and discovered nearly all of their classmates there. The initial round. Tenya was still complaining when he got to the arena, and he was still complaining when he left. He had only won because the odd girl gave up after a short while into their round after he had been tricked into essentially being someone showcasing Hatsume's creations. When he completely messed up and crossed the canyon in such a disrespectful way, Tenya felt even more like a complete idiot. He was slouched in one of the chairs and could hardly hear his cell phone ring. He took it out of his pocket and returned inside for some privacy. It was Mina's turn to oppose Aoyama now. Mina grinned broadly as she effortlessly dodged another of his belly laser blasts. Her continuous integration of dance moves into her martial arts skills was turning out to be a wise move. She landed on her hands after flipping backwards and launching herself over another blast. She simultaneously threw a wade of corrosive acid at Yuga Aoyama's belt device with pinpoint accuracy. His pants started to drop, and he gasped. She closed in and took a massive mile as she slid closer on what could be described as barely acid. She delivered a devastating uppercut to the other. Yuga was knocked unconscious and completely backwards. She then performed a victory dance while laughing and grinning up at Izuku, who returned the smile. She walked over to make sure Yuga wasn't too badly hurt and whispered, "Got to remember to kiss him a lot later." Momo created a shield to block another striking attack from the dark shadow of Fumikare Tokiyami. She made a flash bomb at the same moment and threw it at her opponent. She had discovered during their strategy session that Fumikare's dark shadow was extremely vulnerable to strong light. He retreated further as he let out a painful gasp. Momo thanked Izuku Midoriya in silence for giving her a potential strategy to use against Fumikare. She made and threw another flash bomb, then another, avoiding another blow. Then she paused and grinned widely. She dropped her shield and stood squarely in the open. Fumikare thought this was his chance to make things work against her. She gestured to his feet before he could do so. He moaned as he looked down. With the final bomb, she had pushed him from the arena. She had triumphed without touching him. Momo said nonchalantly, "You need to find a way to overcome intense light, my friend." Fumikare laughed. Fumikare responded, "I guess I will have to work on that." "Well done, my friend." After that, the two of them departed the arena. They both disregarded the applause and cheers from the spectators in the stands, just like the other two rounds. Izuku stood up in the student box. He turned and looked to one side of the box. Shoto stood up too, and he watched. Mina told him, "Kick his ass." "Izzy." Izuku grinned down at her. After that, they strolled down to the arena with Shoto. Izuku, who was standing on the arena platform, turned to face Shoto. Shoto shook his head when Izuku told him, "You can't defeat me with half of your quirk, Todoroki. You have to give it your all." Convinced that he could accomplish it without utilizing the quirk that belonged to his father. He stomped down with his right foot, sending Izuku a massive wave of ice. Who was encased in the ice and did nothing to prevent it. Shoto was worried about that. He was aware that it couldn't be that simple and that Izuku could have moved aside right away with his abilities. Izuku was standing exactly where he had been before the ice trapped him when the ice block suddenly exploded. "I can do that every time. Or I can." Izuku vanished in a streaking blur. Now behind Shoto, he said, "Do this." The other spun around, sending him another wave of ice. He just stayed clear of it this time. After failing to hit Izuku, Shoto declared, "I am not using. I will beat you with my ice." Recognizing that even in the small space of the arena, the other was simply too quick. Endeavor glared at Shoto and then at Izuku at the edge of the arena. His hands, visibly irritated by the circumstances, started to melt the railing. Izuku tried desperately to persuade Shoto to use his full potential against him by saying, "There is no other way that you can beat me. You have to know that. You have to use both of your power. It is your power. Not your father's or anyone else. It is yours. So use it." Shoto just gave a headshake. After saying, "I would rather lose then. No, I won't do it." Shoto turned and walked with pride to the side of the arena, leaving the platform. Losing to Izuku on purpose. The half-ice and half-fire team grinned widely while glaring up at his father. After that, he returned inside, leaving Izuku with a victory that was both unsettling and a little disappointing. Before he could return to the Class 1A box, he left after a minute as well. A big, flaming man was standing in front of Shoto, glaring at his son. "In the future. Boy. You will not embarrass me like you have, ending your fight like that. Not using your full potential and then submitting by stepping out of the arena," Endeavor yelled. "That you will not do again." Shoto shrugged and grinned up at him. Shoto looked at Izuku after saying calmly, "There was no point in me fighting Midoriya. He was going to win that regardless on what I did." He ducked past his father and continued, saying, "He could avoid my ice and if necessary escape it with relative ease. So I just quit." Endeavor was furious when he left. He gave Izuku a scowl now. Endeavor said in a barely audible whisper, "Thank you for trying to. You tried to get him to," before rushing off to let out his rage somewhere else. Izuku sighed before going back to his class in the student box. I thought it was odd and perplexing that Tenya Iida was no longer there and that his name was taken out of the next round. Mina joined him as he went through the list. Mina pointed to the names and remarked, "We lucked out again. I am going up against Momo next and you. Kirishima." Momo was grinning at her when she looked over. Bakugo was off to one side, not really listening. He had fought and defeated Ochako. He was worried now that he had hurt her in their fight. She was in love with Recovery Girl, after all. Izuku leaned back against the wall and eased over beside the other. Bakugo ground his teeth in response to Izuku's whisper, "If you are worried about her, go check on her." Bakugo snarled, "You better be right about her not hating me, or I will kill you." As he left the box, and Izuku thought his former friend was going to surreptitiously check on Ochako's health. He didn't want her or anybody else to know that he liked her. Izuku gave a small laugh. He immediately wished his girlfriend luck and urged her to win as Mina and Momo started to head out for their fight. Momo's creation of an acid-resistant shield annoyed Mina a little, so she ducked to one side. Therefore, her opponent was not even slowed down when she threw acid at them, stopping her from using her acid to defend herself. To her dismay, even her combined dance fighting techniques were not entirely successful because Momo was more skilled at hand-to-hand combat. Mina became concerned when Momo struck her stomach with a strong blow. Back away from the other girl, she slid on her weaker acid. In an effort to at least buy herself some time to think of another strategy to employ against Momo, Mina attempted to use her acid veil. Momo, however, was prepared for that and had thrown a smoke bomb/flash a few feet away from her. She was momentarily blinded, and smoke was swirling around her, preventing her from seeing the other girl. Mina was unprepared and unsure of where to anticipate an attack when she was abruptly flipped off the platform by someone grabbing her shoulders, thereby bringing the round to an end. She grimaced as she stood. She muttered, "I lost," and retreated humbly to the student box. Fortunately, her boyfriend was there to reassure and comfort her, until his turn came. As he climbed onto the platform, Eijiro muttered, "I am so screwed. He is going to kick my ass." He had initially been thrilled to face Izuku when the list was updated. After giving it some thought, he concluded that his chances of winning were roughly 1,000,000 to 1. He could harden himself, of course, but Izuku could have easily removed him from the arena by grabbing him the way he did that villain at the simulation training joint. Or simply beat the living daylights out of him in a matter of seconds. Unable to come up with anything that would truly work, he told himself, "Stop this. It is unmanly to think that way. Got to think of a way to overcome his speed." He went all out with his hardening and won the arm wrestling match, which was different from his previous battle against Tetsu. His only choice this time against Izuku would be to push himself to the limit and maybe attempt to tackle the speedster. He was aware that it would be nearly impossible. He wasn't nearly quick enough. Eijiro was about to strike, but before he could even begin hardening himself, Nomori gave the signal to begin with a crack of her whip. In a tremendous gust of wind, Izuku blew him off the platform by creating a wind funnel. "Fuck!" He let out a disappointed growl. As Izuku was declared the winner, Eijiro complained, "He did exactly what I expected him to do and I had no idea on how to stop him." Izuku made his way back to the Class 1A box seats and approached the screen, where Mina was trying to hold back her laughter. She began to laugh aloud and gestured to the screen. Izuku moaned as she said, "You get to go up against Momo next." She was beaming broadly. He had a suspicion that one of them might figure out how to beat him. The strategy session had covered that in great detail. Creations with which she could essentially outpace him in terms of speed. He glanced at the screen once more and saw that the winner, either Momo or him, would then face Bakugo. Bakugo won automatically because Tenya was disqualified for not showing up. He glanced anxiously at Momo, who gave him a sly smile. Moving away from Momo's flash bombs, Izuku thought about what he could do. Large sheets were now being thrown all over the platform by the creationist. He was aware that every one of them was covered in industrial-grade epoxy, which would be destroyed if he stepped on it. He would adhere to it right away. She had developed an additional strategy during the strategy session. Not being able to just run at her and shove her off the platform the way he had Kirishima. Then, he saw that she was also limiting the space he could move on because she was now continuously creating what were essentially huge fly paper traps everywhere. When she threw one down, it took him about 2 seconds to notice that the big sheets had glue on both sides. It remained there. Now that half of the platform was covered, he was still clueless about how to beat her. Regretfully, she had devised various strategies to get around or past anything he could do. Wind funnels were even made with speed. As he dodged another of the big sheets, he muttered, "Think. Izuku. Think. There has to be a way." Then he noticed that Momo appeared somewhat exhausted and was breathing heavily. With an enormous smile, Izuku remarked, "She is almost out of limpets." The girl had created too many things and overdone it. That meant that all he needed to do to win this fight was to move along the narrow spaces between the sheets. He hurried between the gaps, approaching her at a speed of about 1/10. Before she could concentrate enough willpower to do so, she struggled to make at least one more sheet. Just picking her up, Izuku put her down from the platform. At the outset, he had made the decision that he would not genuinely bring himself to strike her in any way. Momo grinned slightly and said, "Next time, Midoriya." Next time I will beat you. Izuku grinned back. Momo laughed when Izuku told her, "You almost got me with those sticky sheets. A few more and I would have been done for." As cementos began to form cement over the platform and over the enormous flypaper sheets, Nomori declared, "The next bout will start in 20 minutes. We need time to do something about all those stuck down sheet." This allowed Izuku to grab a snack and get ready to face his former tormentor and current archenemy, Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku Midoriya was aware that he would eventually have to confront Katsuki Bakugo again. "You'll have to battle him again." He knew that he would soon have to face Bakugo and that it would be more difficult than just wrapping him in binding strips, ever since the first training session when he bound his one-time tormentor with binding tape. No, it would be a full-on brawl this time. Fortunately, no one could see that his right leg was bouncing wildly with anxiety or that his hands were shaking due to his speed powers. He was terrified of his former friend for years, and maybe even now. He made an effort to forget all the instances in which the other had hurt him, humiliated him, or tormented him unrelentingly. He can't recall being told to end his life in the hopes of being reborn as someone other than a worthless, quirkless loser. It had been the same during the training session, and all of those memories and thoughts came back. However, he managed to overcome his fear and complete the task at hand. This time, he hoped, it would be the same. As he anxiously awaited the start of the final battle, he whispered, "React. Do not overthink it. Just react." Nomori snapped her whip, and Bakugo roared, launching a devastating blast directly at Izuku. This nearly caught him off guard. Nearly. Fortunately, he had quick reflexes as well, or the fight would have been practically over at that point. He was whirling and running to the right when Bakugo released another blast, almost getting hit again. Exactly where he ran. Bakugo sarcastically retorted, "Ha! You are so predictable, Deku," before launching 2 more blasts to the left. Coming very close to hitting him each time. He thought, leaping to the right while simultaneously firing another blast to the right, "I watched you. I am not stupid, Deku. I watched and noticed that when you avoid an attack you move to a certain direction each time," he said. Izuku nearly got caught in another blast. "Fucking reflexes." He snarled, grinning at the same time. He had assumed that Izuku would try to attack him from the right, so he leapt to the left and fired a blast that nearly hit him as he scampered forward. Izuku leaned to one side and whispered, feeling the heat from Bakugo's final blast wash over him. "Somehow he knows what I am going to do before I can do it." He nearly went straight into another Bakugo blast by ducking to the left. Blurred to the left, around the edge of the platform, rushing backwards and away. Then skidded to a stop after colliding with another blast within an inch. He hadn't been struck yet, but it was wearing him down. He was getting tired from dodging and avoiding the blasts, which was a disadvantage. He was aware that Bakugo would hit him with a solid blast once he lost focus. Before that could happen, he needed to come up with a plan to close the distance and end the fight. However, Bakugo was preventing him from doing so, somehow anticipating his next move and launching himself in that direction at the ideal moment. Thus, his only choice was to approach Bakugo closely enough to launch an attack. In order to deliver a blow himself, he would need to use one of his nitroglycerin blasts. The spectators. The old woman smiled slightly and said, "Watch carefully, Meisha. This is a very important moment, one that defines us all." She had stopped looking at her mother, who was watching the altercation between her adoptive uncle and her father from the edge of her seat. Over the years, she had seen this moment on the global network multiple times. All Flashes needed to witness and take note of that particular moment, where the original Flash discovered that the Speed Force was more than just a time-traveling device. The others were listening intently, too. They had all watched this moment on the global network or on a television. It happened so many years ago that I never saw it in person. The situation. Izuku swallowed hard and rushed directly at Bakugo, determined to make his choice. He was aware from previous encounters that it hurt to be struck by one of the other blasts. It was really painful. Bakugo laughed mockingly and threw both hands into a blast. He exclaimed, "Gotcha, Deku," as the blast's heat and concussive force hit him. Izuku grunted loudly in agony as he forced himself forward. The pain, however, was somehow less severe than he remembered. In actuality, it was tolerable. He glanced at his bare hands in a split second and watched in shock as the burns that were being inflicted on him healed instantly. He experienced an odd tingling sensation that he only remembered from entering the time stream using the Speed Force. This feeling, however, was not as strong. All of this happened in a split second, and when he finally came out in front of Bakugo, He was close enough to land a number of powerful blows. Bakugo was knocked unconscious. Izuku felt better as he awaited the award ceremony after winning the sports festival. Bakugo no longer frightened him. As they waited for All Might to give him, Bakugo, and Momo the medals, Mina remarked, Izzy, that was something. Places 1, 2, and 3. Mina gestured up, and Izuku ran his hand through what was left of his hair. Neat trick with healing yourself. But, it did not completely work. Your hair. Half of it was gone, and it was no longer curly. Run through Bakugo's blast and burned off. Like the rest of the class, she had watched in awe as Izuku managed to heal himself nearly instantly despite being pelted by the blast's heat and flames. Izuku remarked, feeling some areas longer and others shorter, I guess I'll need a haircut. Mina laughed. Mina told him with a smile until Bakugo came over, yeah you do. He insisted on speaking with Izuku prior to the award ceremony after the recovery girl brought him around with smelling salts. Bakugo turned and was ready to go when he said, Deku, don't think for a moment that you were better than me. Just because you beat me. You got lucky. I had you. I will destroy you, not just kill you, if you ever tell anyone what I said to you before. He screamed as he stalked to the exit, telling Nomori and everyone else that he would never accept the second place medal, calling it a useless piece of equipment. Is he going to change at all? Izuku shook his head and grinned a little when Mina asked. Izuku told her, without going into detail, that he suspected Bakugo's slight personality changes were caused by a certain girl, who was, as he stated, the total opposite of the other. Actually, I think he has changed some. He is not so, well, hostile or aggressive as he once was. The spectators. He prevailed, great-grandmother. Meisha exclaimed with a broad smile, and the elderly woman laughed. She was aware that he had won, and the others were also aware, so they weren't overly shocked. Yes, he did, but that wasn't the reason we came here, rather, it was so you could witness one of our most significant and powerful features. The elderly woman then gave her great-grandchild a stern look and said, to that end, you will also have to remember the rules that are associated with time travel. The young girl grinned at her. It will take you time to fully understand what the Speed Force allows us to do. Not just use it to go through time. I read them long before we arrived here, so I already know great-grandmother and am fully aware of the most crucial rule. All of the older people there grinned at Meisha with pride as she said, we should not change the timeline because it could have disastrous consequences for our present or future. It had been one of those occasions when even being extremely fast could not save everyone, and it was something that they would have to remind Meisha of multiple times after returning to the present. It is vastly important that you remember that. We are all at one time tempted to change something about the past. Like Inko, they're tempted to go back in time to stop Shinjo Shinigorki from. The old woman winced when she saw that Inko had closed her eyes and that tears were starting to fall from her eyes. Meisha nodded as Inko said, save who you can. Even we cannot save everyone. The old woman pointed to the east and said, there is one more special moment that we need for you to witness. So Izuku, Inko. If you would not mind. They all drove away, but they didn't use the Speed Force until they were at least 1,000 miles away because they didn't want Izuku to sense them again. Heroes. Following the sports festival and a small celebration in the backyard of his house with Mina's parents and his mother. Izuku discovered later that perhaps it would have been better to let Bakugo win. Being the center of attention or a celebrity really sucked for someone who did not want any acclaim. When he and Mina arrived at the train station the next day to go to school, he was mobbed by at least 100 or so people. All wanting selfies and autographs, all wanting to ask him questions. To escape the scene, he simply picked Mina up bridal style and fled. Guess for a while we can't take the train. Mina commented as she held tight with her right arm around his shoulders and her left hand clasped firmly on her right forearm. She was somewhat concerned for a second or two that the way he was carrying her, that someone would be able to look up her skirt. But at the speed he was going, even if someone tried they would not be able to actually notice her panties. She decided from now on she would wear a pair of shorts under her skirt just in case. Other girls in class were wearing shorts under their skirts for an entirely different reason. With the two class perverts always trying to look up them, it made sense. She did not have to, mainly due to that Izuku had threatened to strip them naked and dropping them off in the middle of the city if either Mineta or Kaminari even tried to look up her skirt or do anything perverse that involved her. It did not take long for Izuku to arrive at the UA entrance. To both of their dismay, the front entrance was almost blocked by reporters all wanting to interview not only Izuku, but most of Class 1A. She clamped down hard against Izuku after he told her, "Hang on. We're going in another way." She squealed as he essentially ran up the security boundary wall and then down the opposite side. Izuku shrugged as Mina flattened out her skirt, making sure it didn't reveal too much of her thighs or her panties, and said, "I did not know you could do that." Izuku told her, "I did not know either, but I figured if I can run across water without sinking then. Why not up a wall?" They then went to the classroom, where Ivaza told them that Nomori Kayama would be watching over them as they chose their hero names for the day. When it was her turn, Mina had intended to use the name she loved the most, the Alien Queen, but Nomori shot it down, leaving her with Pinky. She wasn't exactly happy with her heroine name, preferring to be called the Alien Queen because she thought it was the coolest name she could think of. She smiled a little and decided that when she was a well-known heroine, she would change it from Pinky to Alien Queen, regardless of whether or not anyone would approve. Pinky. Well, that is. It is really cute. Izuku whispered to her, and she smiled at him, unsure if she would change it. If Izuku liked it, then she could live with that name. "It's your turn, Midoriya. What name will you choose?" Nomori inquired, and Izuku proudly announced it as he approached the front with his small chalkboard and held it out to the class. "The Flash." Before the teacher could respond, Izuku said, "This is the name I am going to use. No matter what." Nomori gave a small exhale and then nodded. "I suppose it will work, but I kind of believe it works for you. Particularly when you can assure people that you will return quickly or that I will complete that task quickly. Perhaps it will become your catchphrase. Much like when All Might announces his arrival to the world. Who will be the next?" Nomori said, and Izuku returned to Mina's seat, who was frowning a little. The next step of that day was choosing an agency for a week-long internship. Mina muttered with disappointment, "I should have been more insistent about being called the Alien Queen." Then, as Izuku sat, she leaned towards him and said, "The Flash." "Huh. I kinda like it. Though please don't do that. I will be back in a flash too much with me. It sounds really silly," he shrugged. "The future of the next 124 years. Are you certain, mother? If you're correct, then everything is incorrect." Although his mother wished she had been wrong, she was a scientist and what she had found basically meant that their entire past was a mistake. Matthew asked as his mother nodded. Sarah, Matthew's mother, pointed to the monitor and said, "Yes, Maddie. I am certain I am right. Our entire past has been altered. And I think I know who did it." Matthew understood why his mother had spent the previous 5 years building a machine to analyze the timelines in the hopes that there might be a chance to bring back her husband, Matthew's father. Zania, didn't he change it? How could he do that? He died when? When Dad died, didn't he? Matthew asked, and his mother nodded once more. He swallowed back tears at the memory of his father sacrificing himself to stop Zayn. When the brilliant but insane killer had tried to siphon his father's speed force into an ultimate weapon designed to rip apart whole continents. His father had no choice but to give his life making sure that Zayn could not accomplish his plan. Later his mother discovered that Zayn had somehow reversed engineered a way for him to acquire the powers of the current Flash. Namely her husband Matthew's father. Then our history is. His mother nodded when he said that to her. Different from the intended outcome, there was no assassination of Izuku Midoriya. According to what I can infer, the quirk plague did not happen, and instead, a significant number of people with quirk powers were completely eradicated. More importantly, the creation of hero judges never happened, she told him, and he took a sharp breath, recalling from history class all of those events. His ancestor, the original Flash, had been the target of 3 assassination attempts, the last of which was successful. Fortunately for the Midoriya lineage, he and Mina Ashido shared a night together, and 9 months later, their daughter was born. The quirk plague, an illness that wiped out 95% of the population's quirk powers, leaving the government with no choice at the time. The hero judges were the police, judges, and executioners combined. They would administer justice as they saw fit, and they were still in operation today. If a person was jaywalking, they could be put to death by a hero judge if they were judged unredeemable. So, what are our options? Matthew's mother grinned when he asked. Sarah, his mother, said, "You can go back into the past and stop Zayn from assassinating Izuku Midoriya. Change the past back to the way it is supposed to be." He had a lot to lose if he agreed, including his mother, but the world was now a dark and depressing place, with no one smiling or laughing, so he had no choice but to go. For the next day, he spent as much time as he could with his mother, wanting to create and have as many positive memories as he could, something Sarah also desired. She knew that if it worked, she had calculated and come up with the idea that there probably would be a Matthew Midoriya, but it would not be this one. A completely different Matthew would likely exist, but it would not be this one. The history. Slumping against a wall, Horkic Zayn coughed up blood. He never realized how harmful it was to use the Speed Force to enter the time stream. Though he did theorize it was due to his limited access to the Speed Force that caused so much pain and internal damage. He knew that it was a one-time thing, any other attempts would be fatal. So after a few minutes he was able to confirm that he had arrived at the right time period. The main problem he faced though was that he was in no condition to kill anyone. So he would have to rest and recover for several days before he even tried to kill Izuku Midoriya. The first and original Flash, Zayn had read and reread everything he could about his target. Have to make sure that both first two attempts fail. He muttered to himself as he limped down the sidewalk, seeking a good place to hide until he was well enough. Also, no harm must come to Mina Ishido, otherwise a paradox could. He had no idea what the paradox would actually do to him, if there was no future Flashes in it. Would he even exist? Would he be erased altogether? He was not willing to take any chances on that. He found it strange that when he was traversing the time stream he saw glimpses of it changing and reforming into the one he knew from one he didn't. When he found a boarded-up building, he simply removed several of the boards and went inside. Finding a nice clean spot among the debris, he laid down to rest, allowing his limited access to the healing aspects of the Speed Force to help in his recovery. The Ishido house. So, Izzy, which agency are you planning to intern with? Mina asked, glancing at her own list of agencies that had requested her. She looked at his and, with a small, proud smile, noticed that it was much longer. When she saw one in particular, she took a sharp breath and said, "Don't even think about that one there." He laughed, finding it funny that someone with Mina's typical flamboyant personality could be so jealous. However, based on what her mother Keiko had told him, this was Mina's first full-fledged relationship, and that she had a deep-seated fear that he would realize he wanted to be with someone normal because of the way she looked. As a result, her mother told him that she would eventually stop viewing other girls as potential enemies or threats, though it would take time. Izuku felt a familiar tingling sensation before he could say, "No. I was not even considering that one. Actually I was thinking about." He stood up quickly, walked over to the living room window, and turned back to Mina. "Where are your parents?" he asked worriedly, and she looked upstairs. "Go up there with them. Hurry." He gave her the order, and she grudgingly got up and moved to stand beside him. "What is it? What's the matter?" Mina asked, and Izuku held his breath. She observed an electrical field of some kind that appeared to expand as she stared out the window. Suddenly, someone fell out of the field and landed on the yard with a crash. Izuku blurred outside, standing between the intruder and the Ishido house, his hands clasped into fists. The arrival grinned as he looked up from the ground. Just before he fainted, the other said, "Hiya Gramps. Nice to meet you." The first thing Izuku did was call Ivaza and All Might because he had no idea what else to do, especially since it was so clear that the stranger who had just shown up was related to him. He had bluish-green eyes and brown-tinted green hair, and Mina had asked him if he was a long-lost brother. Now that the two pro-heroes were there, along with Recovery Girl, who had used smelling salts to lure the intruder around, they all watched as the young man awoke and then grinned while looking directly at Mina. "Hi Grandma. Now I see where I got these from." He ran his hand through his hair and touched two tiny horns, causing Mina to gasp. "All right, tell me who you are and why you're here." Izuku made a demand, and the young man grinned back. "Isn't it obvious, Gramps? I'm Matthew Midoriya, one of your future relatives, even though you are actually my great, and great-granddad." Michael told them, counting off each grade on his right finger, as to why I am here. "It is to prevent you from being assassinated and turning the future into a literal hell." Mina was more than interested as she listened with the others as Michael essentially told them the entire heartbreaking story, but what really worried and intrigued her was the fact that they had spent the night together following the second attempt on Izuku's life, which led to her becoming a teenage mother. When Michael finished an hour later, Ivaza and All Might simply stared at the young man in disbelief, unable to comprehend all the details. Ivaza swallowed hard and had trouble breathing. "So you are telling me that on the second attempt on Midoriya's life," she said. Michael said that 11 of his fellow classmates did not. They were killed. Ivaza started to grit his teeth. "Who were they? Which ones were they? First and foremost, if what you say is true, which I am leery to accept that you are actually from the future, but young. Well, our Midoriya says it is possible. We need to make sure that none of these attempts happen," All Might said lamentingly as Michael listed them off. Michael laughed lightly as he said this. That is why I am here. To stop Zayn from succeeding. Return the future into what it is supposed to be, Michael said. When I accidentally entered the future myself, it was evident that I had not been assassinated, indicating that Zayn had changed the course of events. You're from that future, then, where I did pass away. All right. Am I the only one who finds this whole situation completely perplexing? Izuku inquired, and he could see that even Michael was perplexed. Michael leaned back heavily against the chair he was sitting on and said, My mother believes that if we stop Zayn from killing you, then the future will go back to its proper path and where I came from will never have existed. Which I can tell you that it would not be that bad if it did disappear. How can we prevent this Zayn from murdering Midoriya? Ivaza inquired, still worried about what the other person had said, that more than half of his class would be killed. That disturbed him, and he vowed to ensure that did not occur. I know now, based on what Michael has told me. Michael had committed to memory every detail of the first 2 assassination attempts and the one successful one, which he shared with Izuku, making sure to include everything. From what he said, this Zayn was only able to get away because I did not know who it was that fired the supersonic bullet that he was able to increase the velocity by adding a small measure of speed force into it, Izuku said, before outlining his entire plan. Michael grinned as he said, No, I won't be so idle now that I know who and why someone shot at me. Izuku's plan did not exactly sit well with All Might or Ivaza. It was too dangerous and put the young speedster, who was still essentially only a student, in danger. Confronting and combating a psychopath, according to the other Midoriya from the future. However, they had no real option because Zayn could not be defeated by any other hero. Not to mention prevent him from killing Izuku and then launching a biological plague against the world a few years later. Zayn is too strong for even All Might to stop. All Might said sharply, You are not facing this Zayn alone, young Midoriya. I forbid it. Ivaza wholeheartedly concurred. When the time comes, I will be there. Michael said, recalling all the hero judges and his own father who were powerless to stop Zayn. The main problem will be is that Zayn is extremely smart. Even though he is a coward, his intelligence is off the charts, which made him a real threat in my time. Every one of them was always a step or two behind the madman. Mina needed to talk to Izuku alone because she could not stand it any longer. She grabbed his right hand and yanked him away from the trio. As she pulled him around the corner of the house, Izuku asked bewilderedly, Mina? Ivaza smirked and shook his head as All Might made a questioning gesture toward them. Ivaza decided he wanted more information about this Zayn and said, I think young Ishido needs to talk to Midoriya privately. He then started to pose targeted questions to the other Midoriya, primarily regarding the plague. After turning the corner, Mina threw Izuku into her arms and held him firmly. She trembled and pressed her face against his right shoulder, tears streaming down her cheeks. When he asked, Mina, are you all right? She shook her head, wiping away some of the tears on his shirt. Mina's voice wavered as she sobbed, No, I am not all right. She looked at him and said, Some jackass wants to kill you. Take you away from me. I'm crying once more. Then we come to find out that after his second attempt, oh get this. He ends up killing over half of our class. We spend the night together and I get pregnant. Then this Zayn successfully kills you and you. You do not even look concerned. She said sorrowfully, and Izuku inhaled softly. Izuku smiled slightly and said, Your father would probably kill me anyhow for, spending the night with you and us having an accident. Mine pushed herself away at arm's length and gave him a fierce look. Mina snarled angrily, That is not funny, Izuku. And Izuku realized he was in trouble. Not because of the anger in her eyes or the tone of her voice. However, she referred to him as Izuku rather than Izzy. He pulled her back against him as she sobbed, I do not want to lose you. Sorry, I tried to lighten the mood a little. No, it is not funny and I do not want to get lost. I am actually freaking out about this whole thing. But Mina, this Zayn is not going to kill me. I now know about him and what he intends to do. Thanks to our distant relative. Izuku relayed this to her and Mina was still thus. He made the decision to share with her the details of his trip to the future that he had been reluctant to share. Mina. I did not tell you this before. When I went to the future and I met the future you. And she gave me that message for you. She, oh boy. She gave him an odd look. Mina let out an audible gasp as he blurted out, Okay, well that Mina. We are that one and me from the future are married. Mina asked with a smile, Really? And Izuku nodded. Then she frowned and gave his right arm a forceful slap. She glared at him again and asked, Why didn't you tell me this before? Izuku swallowed hard. I did not want to. Well, I was not sure if I should. It could alter the time stream if you knew that we got married. Izuku replied with a grin. Izuku felt perspiration start to appear on his forehead as Mina said, "Bull crap. You did not tell me because you thought that I would overreact or assume that just because we are married in the future, I might press you for more details. Or maybe want to move our relationship at a faster pace." He tried nervously to come up with an answer to that, but his mind went blank. He thought about not telling her, but he decided that it might come back to haunt him later. "Is there anything else you have not told me?" she asked. Mina gave Izuku a sour look as he said, "There is one minor thing. Okay, you got to remember that it is or will be you." Indicating that he should go on. Mina was unsure whether or not to be upset when he blurted out the final line, "Well, remember it was you. So to not get too upset, she kissed me." Izuku suspected that he was in trouble regardless of Mina's statement. "Let me get this straight. In reality you kissed another girl, or rather an older woman, but it was me. So I do not know if I should be pissed or not. I will have to think about that one for a bit." He could manage this trouble, but it was a different story when a future psychopath was determined to murder him. She was more concerned with whether or not to be upset about him kissing another girl, which was the only positive aspect of confessing. The internship. Izuku would be attending his internship when Zayn would try, based on what the future Midoriya had told him and the others. He had originally intended to intern with Death Arms, but Ivaza and All Might insisted that he work for All Might instead. Primarily to allow the #1 hero to closely monitor him and look out for Zayn. He was with All Might at the same time. Momo, Itsuka, and Mina were entering the Uami agency through the lobby doors. At first, she was taken aback by Uabami's desire for her to accompany Momo and Itsuka. The heroine was known to typically accept interns who were, in a word, attractive. Yes, she was attractive to most perverts who thought quirk abnormals were sluts or nymphomaniacs who craved sex. More significantly, though, she was positive that Izuku thought she was attractive and not because he thought she was a simpleton. In front of Mina's face, Momo waved her right hand and said, "Hello. Are you still in there?" Mina blushed first, and then she smiled at her friend. Momo laughed as Mina said, "Sorry about that. I was just lost in thought." Mina flushed once more when Momo asked, "Thinking about Midoriya?" As they stepped into the elevator, Mina remarked, "Can't help it. I love him, and since we are here, I kinda miss him. You know, I was surprised that Uabami wanted me. I mean, usually she picks, well, the real pretty girls to intern." Momo gave her an odd look. Mina shook her head when Momo said, "Oh come on Mina, you are pretty." Mina scowled and pointed to herself, saying, "No, not as pretty as you or Kendo. Maybe I would be if I was not. If I was not pink and did not have horns." Momo remarked, "That just makes you different. Bet Midoriya likes how you look." Mina grinned. "Yeah, he does. Though he might be in the minority. Not that I want those two perverts to. Try to perv on me. But they don't even try. Kinda lets me know I am not. Well, they continually try with you, Toru and Ochako. Hell, they even with Kyoka and Suyu. Never me." Mina replied and Momo began to giggle. Mina shook her head when Momo said, "You don't know, do you?" Momo kept laughing as Mina responded, "Know what? Oh, that your loving boyfriend threatened to strip both Mineta and Kaminari naked and drop them in the middle of the financial district if they ever try to do anything perverted regarding you." Momo told her. She explained how she found out, saying, "Iida overheard and told me that." Mina grinned and laughed, saying, "I bet those two assholes would try if they weren't scared that Midoriya would actually do that to them." She clapped her hands together. Momo shook her head once more as Mina whispered, "It's important to remember to kiss him the next time I see him." As the elevator reached the top floor, Momo said, "Like you need an excuse." Itsuka listened in silence as she stood there. Itsuka merely shrugged when the well-endowed creationist said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Kendo. We kind of got involved and I totally forgot you were there." Mina winced as Itsuka said, "That is all right. Sort of liked hearing about how gallantly charming Midoriya is." Her eyes were bewildered. Now that she had another girl to worry about, Mina muttered, "Great, another one." She made a concerted effort to avoid feeling jealous, but she found it difficult to do so. Zero standing atop a tall skyscraper building in Musudafu's business district. Izuku, leaning heavily against his knee and placing his right foot on the railing, looked out over the city. All Might took a deep breath and said, "I like it up here. It gives me a sense of ease as I look out over the city. I actually envy you, Midoriya." I made several mistakes over my life, and the primary one was that I never allowed myself to become long-term romantically involved with anyone. Izuku gave him an odd look. Izuku started to say, "Wait, everyone. Well, everyone seems to assume that you and..." But All Might interrupted him. Then All Might looked back at the city and said, "That me and Nomori Kayama are." "No, we are not. She is another of my regrets. There was a time that..." "Never mind. We need to focus on what the future Midoriya told us. Not my problems." Izuku chose not to pursue the matter further. However, he wanted to know why the number one hero never dated anyone. More people than anyone could count must have wanted to. Izuku shrugged as the big hero changed the topic and said, "That was some trick you did running up the building like that. I have been attempting different things to see what I can and cannot do. As for running up walls and other inclined surfaces, as long as I keep at a constant speed I can do it." Izuku replied with a grin. However, he had mentioned that Izuku had done that. He continued to worry silently about what would occur over the next 5 hours. I didn't tell the young man that the future that Matthew Midoriya had come from would disappear if they could stop Zayn, especially since the attempt on Midoriya's life was essentially a pivotal moment. Despite the large man's smile, I could see All Might's grim face. The young man said, "We have to stop Zayn right here and now. We can't let him succeed." All Might bit his lower lip and said, "We won't, and we will stop him no matter what." "That is if your plan works." Michael Midoriya was currently entering Death Arms Agency while wearing Izuku's hero uniform. Just as anticipated, Izuku was Michael, for all intents and purposes. The other had offered, unwilling to allow Izuku to do both. Simultaneously play the bait and spring the trap. Now we better get into position. I still do not like the idea of not facing Stain the hero killer. But if this plan is to work, I cannot interfere, and neither can you," he sternly stated to Izuku. Together, they exited the building and went to the location where Zayn would try. Zero. After obtaining a small caliber bullet while zipping into a small police station, Zayn departed. History claims that Izuku Midoriya was nearly struck by a sniper. The attempt Zayn had made was that one. On his subsequent attempt, he had to build a tiny explosive device to be placed inside the A1 classroom. Izuku would attempt to remove every other student prior to the detonation, but he could only safely remove the teacher and 9 other students. However, 3 of those suffered severe injuries, the others were all killed. Then, in order to maintain what had to happen, Zayn would have to sneak into both Ashido's and Midoriya's homes, stealing every contraceptive from each of them. The 2 teenagers had to have unprotected sex, and an accident had to happen. According to the same history, Zayn was able to kill Izuku Midoriya 3 days later. His future would be altered if he failed, and he was unaware of the potential repercussions of those changes. He may not be born at all, or something like that. Slumping against the wall, he returned to his hideout in squalor. Taking deep breaths, he was pushed to the limit when he went full speed. He wouldn't be able to get enough speed force into the bullet to shoot Izuku Midoriya for at least another hour. He would therefore have to walk to his viewpoint. He headed to the abandoned building where Stain the hero killer was facing off against Izuku Midoriya, Tenya Iida, and Shoto Todoroki. It was noted in history that an unidentified assailant attempted to shoot Midoriya just after Stain was defeated. Therefore, Zayn had to be prepared to play the part of the sniper. The quickest person alive. Michael Midoriya claims that the building Zayn uses was not the only building that was hidden atop a nearby structure. However, the scene where he and 2 of his classmates battled Stain was also visible. He looked over and saw that All Might's knuckles were crushing the railing's cement. Izuku could tell that the other wanted to step in because the pro-hero was staring down at the scene. He was on the verge of jumping down and confronting Stain. Izuku had the same emotions and desires, so he completely understood. However, they had to stay because they couldn't stop Zayn otherwise. Which was more crucial than putting an end to Stain? Both of them saw Matthew Midoriya, wearing Izuku's hero uniform, arrive and strike Stain with a devastating blow. Barely able to avoid the insane psychopath's sword swipe. Izuku said, "He was right. He is fast, but not as fast as I am." All Might took a sharp breath. He started to seriously question how fast Izuku Midoriya could be based on what he could see of the other Midoriya. All Might shook his head when he said, "I might have to intervene after all." All Might pointed to a small building to the left and said, "No. We need to stick to the plan. Do not worry. Ivaza is ready to step in if needed." He was certain that Ivaza was making every effort to stay out of the conflict. However, they had all decided that they had to stick to what Matthew had actually told them. Accordingly, Tenya Iida, Shoto Todoroki, and Ostensibly, Izuku Midoriya were present to combat Stain. Endeavor didn't show up until later. To preserve the time stream, they had to at least make an effort to stick to what actually happened. Izuku said, "I know, I just hope this works, otherwise I may have to do something drastic." All Might pondered the implications of that statement. Izuku, however, looked down at the scene and said nothing more. He had already made up his mind that he would not permit Zayn to make a second attempt if it came to that. He made this promise to Mina. So he would do what he had to do. You can even go into the future and alter the timeline. He watched the fight below, thinking to himself, when this is over, I need to think and establish some rules, so that this never happens again. Zero Matthew swallowed hard as he dodged the sword slash. He was quick, to be sure, but so was this hero killer, Stain. After the man's first blow, Stain appeared to be able to evade or block any further blows due to the man's incredible reflexes. Even at his maximum speed, which was regrettably only roughly half of Izuku's. But in order to avoid Zayn becoming suspicious, he had to make it look good. The bulletproof Kevlar armor that Ivaza forced him to wear under Izuku's uniform was what was currently limiting him. His movements were limited by 1/100th of a second due to its weight. It appeared to be all Stain required. Matthew shuddered in fear as Stain smirked and grinned menacingly, saying, "You are different, boy. You are not like the others. You show that you are worthy to be considered a hero." The others are self-proclaimed, egotistical and unworthy of that name. You are different now. Since he thought his father had stopped him, he had never faced or fought anyone like this, not even Zayn. It frightened him to actually fight someone this insane and deranged. The slug knocked him down and backwards, dazing him when it struck his chest. Stain let out a furious roar, glaring around with mad eyes that were wide and rimmed in red. He yelled, "Coward," in an attempt to track down the person who had shot the young man he believed deserved the title of hero. To shoot someone from hiding and from a great distance. Dishonorable coward. Immediately assumed it was either the stupid fool himself or one of Tamura Shigaraki's thugs. He made a silent vow to kill Shigaraki in the most agonizing manner possible the next time they crossed paths. Zero Zayn, on the assigned rooftop, watched the battle with interest and a little bewilderment. He had read in the history books that the first Flash was extremely fast, so he said, "If Izuku Midoriya. I thought he was faster than that. He is the original Flash and he seems not as fast as I thought he would be, so quick that he could easily break through the timeline." He could swear now, as he watched, that the young man was no faster than himself. He grinned and snapped his fingers. He took a deep breath as he prepared to meet history's requirement. Now I know. He is not fully comfortable or trained enough to fully access his true power. That has to be it. He took the bullet in his left hand and started to focus all of his remaining speed force into it, pointing it down at the young speedster. Now he only needed to flick it with his finger to complete his first unsuccessful attempt. The young man let out an audible gasp when the supersonic bullet hit his chest. I couldn't imagine what had gone wrong. The agency of Uami. Mina rarely paid much attention, constantly taking her phone out of her pocket and gazing at the screen. Izuku had assured her that he would give her a call as soon as it was over to make sure she was okay. The third day of the internship is currently underway. Her time at the Uami agency had become routine for her, Momo, and Itsuka. Instead of being there to learn about being a heroine, they felt more like Uami's aides. They had gone from photo shoots to public appearances to the pro-heroine promoting a particular kind of hairspray in the last 2 days. Now they were doing just that. She giggled as she turned to face Momo and Itsuka. Her hair was fortunately too short to appear in the commercial, but Momo and Itsuka's were ideal. Her friend gave her a sour look when he saw her expression. The thought of appearing in an advertisement did not sit well with me. However, when Uami appeared in public the other day, none of the three of them liked it. Throughout their entire stay, the three girls stood idly by and then convinced numerous older men that they had no interest in casual hookups. Mina had to question how Uami could be smiling while a number of men made crude remarks or tried to approach her for sex. However, the pro-heroine grinned and gave the impression that she was flattered by the remarks or that an older man was interested in having sex with her. Mina had to agree when Momo whispered to her, "That type of popularity I do not want." She desired for her friend to be considered a hero. The men didn't fantasize about having sex with this person. As she attempted to remove the hairspray from her hair, Itsuka remarked, "Mount Lady must have the same problem." Mina was assisting the two girls in their attempt to get rid of the stiff binding material from their hair as the three of them withdrew to the women's restroom. Momo bravely attempted to return her hair to her typical spiky style and said, I actually heard she likes the attention. She washed her hair first, then used her own hairspray to put it back in the way she wanted. They had all watched the news broadcasts where Kiyomi Woods was fighting the giant criminal and then defeated him, and they all said, that is why she shows off her ass so much. The blonde woman nearly shoved her ass in the direction of the onlookers and spectators. Mina's mother had expressed her displeasure that the outline of her area could be seen if one looked closely enough. Those who could see camel toe would be considered impolite. Momo winced as Mina suggested, perhaps that is about the only gimmick she could think up. You know, being sexually appealing? When she was promoted from sidekick to hero, she had been told that might be a good gimmick for her. She found it bothersome that many people thought she was physically attractive despite the fact that her hero uniform was skimpy. That in order to be a well-liked hero, she had to show off her possessions. In order to make her quirk easier to use, she designed the uniform. Not to be a sex object of any kind. Momo said sharply, I for one will never go that route. She is still thinking about redesigning her uniform to make it more covert. Particularly after receiving a dozen or so pieces of paper with contact details, and all the twisted taunts she had received during Uami's public appearance. They all wanted her to give them a call. Mina's cell phone exploded, signaling that she had received a text message. She sprang for it, then let out a frustrated growl. Her mother was the only one reminding her to pause for milk on the way home. Mina took a sharp breath when her friend asked, Mina, is there something you are not telling us? Mina responded, I am just worried about Izzy. Remember, he does have a habit of getting into mischief. Mina left for one of the restroom stalls because she needed some alone time. Actually, she was unable to think of anything else because she was so preoccupied with Izuku. In the event that his plan failed, that future maniac escaped, or worse, Izuku suffered harm. She wasn't sure if she could survive going through this again. The waiting for that jackass to try to kill him again one day. Another attempt would be made in a week, according to his and her future relative. Just over half of their class was killed in that one. The idea of her and Izuku spending the night together later in a desperate and depressing moment made her flush. Though not that soon and not for that reason, she did have plans for them to eventually have sex. Instead of comforting one another, she wanted it to be special. When it was just Toru sending her a brief, how's it going? Message, her phone exploded once more, and she felt the urge to smash it in two. Izuku sped off after the impact of the speed-forced increased bullet through the second Matthew Midoriya. It took him a millisecond to decide not to rush in, and that was before All Might could even counsel. Although his distant relative was not his aim, Izuku was confident Matthew would be alright. Because the bullet had hit his chest, which is where reinforced Kevlar and an extremely thick armor plate would be. No, Horkic Zayn was his target, and he intended to stop the psychopath's twisted vision of the future. Izuku was determined not to allow such a future to occur. Izuku was able to get to Zayn in 0.5 of a second. Directly in front of the man, appearing in a blur of green. Who staggered back in shock. Izuku said sharply, surrender Zayn. I will not let the future you want to create happen. The man looked at him and then grinned. Recognizing what had happened instantly. Zayn grinned and then scowled, saying, ah, the Flash's brat. He followed me and told you what intended to do. He chuckled and shook his head, saying, after all the talk his father had about warping the timeline, his brat goes ahead and really fucks it up. He turned and sped off, but he did not go very far. Listen, boy. There is no way you can stop me. I have the same powers as you do. I can run and move just as fast as you can. I am a man though, and you. You are a child. He skidded to a stop and let out a terrified gasp. After a solid 5 miles of running, he reasoned that the past Midoriya would never be able to catch up to him or pass him. He had been mistaken. Thinking it was a coincidence, he spun around and drove off. Once more, the younger man appeared before him without any explanation. To his dismay, the boy was present when he repeated the action. With shock and frustration, he uttered, this is impossible. It is a trick. Izuku, who didn't particularly enjoy boasting, declared, I am the first Flash. Zayn. My powers have not been reduced due to the plague or time. So in essence I am faster than you could ever hope to be. Zayn needed to understand that he had no chance of escaping at all. The man chuckled. After preparing himself for the discomfort of using the Speed Force, Zayn said, then I will just jump ahead a few years and kill you then. The energy was then drawn into him as he bolted. Izuku started to chase after him. But all of a sudden, Matthew tackled him from behind. Izuku yelled. What are you doing? I have to stop him. Matthew, who was out of breath, responded negatively by shaking his head. Breathing heavily. Immediately after it seemed he had been shot, he had run as fast as he could. Sure, he was shot, but it was in the bulletproof Kevlar. Just in time to prevent Izuku from approaching the time-temporal effects caused by Zayn's Speed Force access. Matthew exclaimed, No. Don't. It is too late. Izuku gave him a perplexed look. Then they heard it together. They both watched as the temporal forces tore Zayn apart, Zayn screaming in agony. Now that I'm standing, I can talk without having to hold my breath. My mom warned me. This was a one-way trip. Well, for me and him. With you here having full access to the Speed Force, our limited ability to control and access it is limited. They kept hearing Zayn scream in agony, but in reality, neither could see him. In fact, he was inside the temporal gateway, being methodically torn into nothingness. Sometimes fragments of Horkic Zayn would simply materialize and then vanish. In fact, Zayn would feel every single one of those fragments until they vanished into thin air. As Zayn's screams seemed to fade in volume before disappearing, Matthew remarked, when he tried Well, you really do not want to know. But if you tried to go with him, you too would be, it is over. Izuku muttered, not what I wanted, as All Might finally closed the distance between them. Insistence on knowing what had transpired. He abruptly left, leaving Matthew to explain the entire situation to All Might. I will tell you later. Right now, I need to, he said. Izuku, for his part, believed he had failed. He didn't want Zayn dead because a hero wouldn't allow that to happen. According to what Matthew had told him, he ought to have taken action. He too would have been ripped apart if he had gone through that temporal portal that Zayn had made. He grew increasingly convinced that it was not appropriate to use the Speed Force to travel to the past or the future unless absolutely required, and that it was crucial that he not change history if he did so. That could be disastrous, as Zayn had demonstrated. He stopped and gasped. He had run all the way to India in his thoughts, but he had not realized how long and how fast he had been running. He stood for a moment, and several of its citizens gave him strange looks. He turned around and hurried home. He muttered as he sped across the Sea of Japan, got to remember to also pay attention. Otherwise I might end up getting lost. He had been so engrossed in his thoughts that he had not even realized he had run across and ended up in India. On his way back to his homeland, he made a stop at Mount Fuji and gave Mina a call. Wanted to reassure her that all was well. He would later, but without the graphic details, tell her how Zayn died. The observers of the future. All 5 speedsters experienced the time displacement for a millionth of a second, and all but 2 of them were erased during that period. Came back in the same moment. In reality, none of them were aware of what had occurred. However, they all now remembered a different Midoriya from the family line. Meisha shuddered a little as she asked, Great-Grandma. What was that? She had a fleeting memory of being erased and then returned. The elder woman's face twisted. Meisha nodded as the old woman explained, that was what happens when you screw with the timeline or history. So be warned and make sure you never do that, understand? Swallowing forcefully. They were all shaken by whatever had happened. Those who were unable to access the Speed Force would not be impacted by being erased in a millionth of a second and then instantly returned. However, it was a terrible recollection for them, one that would haunt them. However, she believed that Inko, who had not disappeared, shared a distinct set of incredibly unsettling alternate memories with her, involving the elderly woman who was raised by a very melancholy mother and without a father. Every night, the mother sobbed herself to sleep. The 5 of them had to wait a few moments before they could proceed. They all agreed when Inko said, I think it might be best that we suspend the rest of this. They left and returned to their own era. The lesson in history was over. The matriarch had to get her family's approval before she could show one more event. It was difficult to ignore or forget the unsettling small memories. She had a feeling those memories would haunt her for some time. She simply couldn't forget the abrupt loss of her father and the terrible impact it had on her mother. How to handle a second Midoriya? Izuku returned to Ua to find All Might, Mr. Iwaza, and Matthew waiting for him. Now they had to decide what to do. Matthew had informed them that he was unable to go back in time, even if he was assisted by Izuku in entering the temporal portal. The future was once again what it should have been. There would be repercussions for the young time traveler if he returned. Specifically, there might have been another Matthew Midoriya who fit into that timeline. Simply put, there were too many unknowns. His mother had no idea how the changes would affect their past, present, and future. The issue with modifying or repairing a timeline was that, All Might said, So what do we do with this young man, if he cannot return to his own time? The most simple solution is for him to attend UA. I believe that I can ask Principal Nezu to admit him under a special attendee status. Ivaza replied with a sigh. Matthew was making excuses for not going to school, believing that it was a complete waste of time. I do not know about that. For one, I have graduated high school through the virtual network last year, and another, I have advanced knowledge from the future. He was going to continue protesting that he shouldn't have to go to school. All of his protests vanished from his lips when he saw Momo Yaoyorozu. Even though she was more than 124 years his senior, she certainly didn't look it. But since I am in reality only a few months older than my granddad here, I guess I could attend school. He grinned. Izuku groaned. The other Midoriya shrugged as Izuku said, "You got to stop calling me that." Oh, and I would not call Mina grandma too often. She might take an exception to that. Perhaps we could tell everyone that he is my cousin from the United States. That somehow some of my power seeped into him and he now has speed powers like mine. Both adults raised their eyebrows. Primarily because it was obvious to anyone who looked that the two were related, even though Matthew's skin and hair were pink. He combed his hair with his hand. Matthew asked, "What about these?" as he displayed the two tiny horns that were typically concealed beneath his pinkish-green hair. All Might laughed. All Might yelled, "Wear a hat," and left with Ivaza. Accommodations were already set up. Matthew would continue to live with his great-grandfather and add another great-grandmother, Inko. The incident on I Island. Izuku was initially denied permission to visit I Island. Momo Yaoyorozu had made the decision to invite every girl in the class to the I Island Expo, but she was unable to persuade her parents to include one boy. Even though it wasn't her boyfriend, as she didn't yet have Oniya, it was one of her classmates. So Mina could leave and he would be left at home. He was invited by All Might 2 days prior to the event. He wanted to surprise Mina, but he had been tempted to tell her. Matthew had to stay behind in the interim so that Ivaza could update him on the tests and other assignments that the other students in the class had completed. Izuku scowled and shook his head as he peered out the plane's window. All Might turned to face the #1 hero and questioned, "What is the matter, young Midoriya?" Izuku responded, looking back out the window and down at the ocean below, "I could run here faster than this. Guess for me it feels kinda slow riding now in planes, trains, or even cars." He could almost picture himself racing across the water and getting there at least 5 or 6 hours before he would be flying. The issue with that, though, is that he wouldn't be allowed entry until All Might showed up if he came that way. His patience would be severely tested if he had to spend hours sitting in security. Despite the fact that Izuku will not inherit One for All Might remarked, "So you are becoming accustomed to your speed." The young man was more than likely to take his place as the #1 hero. However, he was troubled by the possibility that he would be the last to hold One for All. No one with that unique spark had been available for him to transfer the power to. Izuku was at the end of his patience when the plane arrived 2 hours later. However, he thought it was hilarious when a large group of fans nearly robbed All Might. Once more, he had to exercise patience while All Might signed autographs, had selfies taken, and had at least 50 women and girls kiss him. Izuku merely hoped that would be the end of the ordeal. Instead of waiting for hours on end, he wanted to go surprise Mina. Then he saw 2 girls, each brandishing some kind of strange pogo sticks, bouncing in their direction. With her long blonde hair, the lead girl was cheerfully waving at All Might. The second girl, whose short, blonde hair was accentuated with pink and purple strands. It should not have been on the weird pogo sticks, based on Izuku's observations. Even though her attire was more revealing than Momo Yaoyorozu's hero uniform, it was still enough to make him blush. The 2 girls, who were now close enough for Izuku to recognize them as identical twins, were greeted by All Might. David Shields' daughters are Melissa and Stacy Shields. Both were presented to him, and Stacy caused him some anxiety. Particularly when she took hold of his hand and refused to release it. Rather, she gave him a sly smile while stroking his fingers with her thumb. All Might kindly suggested that he go see Mina before he became too embarrassed, and he gladly took advantage of the opportunity to run away, moving at a speed of 1/20th. Melissa remarked as she watched Izuku drive off in a green blur, "Wow, he is fast." She glanced at her twin sister, who was clearly disappointed and attracted to the young man. No wonder Dad wants to analyze the energy fields that he can create. Like most people, All Might was taken aback by Stacy's actual intelligence. She added, "The static, kinetic, and thermal energies could be near infinite, so I doubt that Dad will be able to actually accurately measure that amount of energy. Similar to their father or her sister Melissa." She walked over to the tallest building on the island and said, "Well, we better take you to Dad. He has been itching to see you." Casting a sidelong glance in the direction Izuku Midoriya had left, Melissa, her sister, walked beside her. Melissa whispered to her sister, who shrugged, Stacy. Uncle might told us that. You know Midoriya has a girlfriend, remember?" With a small, seductive smile, Stacy whispered back, "So what? If his girl can't handle a little competition, then she doesn't deserve him." Melissa understood exactly what her sister was thinking. Midoriya would simply be a step up in her sister's hierarchy. That's all. Izuku paused close to a sizable panel that looked more like a table and let out a long sigh of relief. He entered the hotel Momo would be staying at and the rooms she had reserved using the touchpad keyboard. The hotel appeared on the screen and provided detailed instructions. After speeding off once more, he arrived at the hotel in a matter of seconds and chose to use the stairs rather than the elevator. He was having more and more trouble with it. The entire process seemed to take too long. Elevators, trains, and even plane rides. Everything seemed to be going very slowly. He simply did not know what to do with all of the energy that had accumulated in him. He sighed with relief once more when Mina answered the door to the first of the two that Momo had rented while holding a toothbrush in her mouth. He seemed to feel less impatient because of the one thing and the one person. He didn't feel so uncomfortable because of her calm demeanor. Mina pulled the toothbrush from her mouth and said, "Izzy, what are you doing here?" He sagged a little. Mina laughed and threw herself at Izuku as he said sadly, "Oh, I thought you would be happy to see me." She put her arms around his neck and gave him a kiss. When he knocked on the door of Kyoka and Toru's hotel room, Mina was pleasantly surprised and said, "Of course I am happy to see you. I thought that you could not come." This being an invitation only kinda thing. She looked down the hallway before beckoning him into the room, saying, "Now it won't be so bad being here." Kyoka was downstairs looking for some double batteries for her portable CD player while Toru was in Momo, Ochako, and Suyu's room. For a brief period, she was left alone with Izuku. She kissed him once more and said, "I was seriously missing you." Even though they had only been together for 7 hours, Izuku pretended to say goodbye at the airport and said, "I came with all might and wanted to surprise you. Been missing you too." Then he scowled. Mina scowled as well when he said, "The warning, remember?" She is still worried about what would enrage her so much that it nearly ended their relationship. That she should keep in mind that it wasn't his fault. "Oh pooh. Guess we got to worry about that while we are here. Bad enough I lost the high card game to determine who goes with Momo to the expo and the reception tonight," Mina said with a grin. Izuku swallowed hard and said, "Of course that also means I can spend the time with you, perhaps alone and in here." Mina kept smiling as Izuku said, "I have been invited to both." Mina told him, "Then you got to go. Later we can spend some alone time together, but you got to go." Prior to the reception, she gave her 3 friends specific instructions to watch him closely. As long as they realized that Izuku Midoriya is hers, they might even be allowed to dance with him. She was becoming more adept at controlling her jealousy. However, she would not have let him leave in the first place if she had been aware of everything that transpired. The assault. Everything went crazier when the leader put the quirk enhancer on his head. Izuku was unable to approach the now nearly unbeatable villain quickly enough. Even after the others arrived, it still felt impossible because All Might was having trouble. Then he had an idea, but he wasn't very good at science. Fortunately, 2 girls found science to be very appealing. Streaking at Stacy and Melissa at the same time. "Listen, I need to know something. What happens when you add more energy to a magnet?" he asked both of them. Melissa said, "Well, in theory, it would supercharge it." Stacy nodded. "It might even make it uncontrollable. That is if enough energy is surged into it." "Oh, I get what you were thinking. But you have to be careful not to give him too much energy. Right, Melissa?" Stacy asked her sister who was biting her bottom lip. Izuku sighed as Melissa said, "Too much and he could become unstable and explode with enough force to destroy the whole island." Looking back at the battle, Izuku muttered, "There is always something." He gestured to Katsuki Bakugo, and the 2 girls nodded. "Get under cover, and if you think I am giving him too much, tell Kachan over there to shoot a blast at me." He grinned and sprinted back toward the melee. He ran as quickly as he could around the villain. In addition to the kinetic and static energy, he instantly felt the speed force coursing through him, directing all of it straight into the villainous leader, who burst out laughing, boasting that Izuku would become a living god as a result of everything he did. It got to the point where the man could no longer truly control it. He cried out, pleading with Izuku to stop, claiming that he was no longer in control of the magnetic fields. He was struck by metal, and he was powerless to stop it. Kashan abruptly threw one of his blasts at Izuku, causing him to stop. Izuku shouted to All Might, "Now All Might, take him down." And the hero understood right away. He leapt to a great height and used all of his strength to slam his fist into the leader's face, putting an end to the danger. The situation. Izuku staggered to the guest room, trembling. He was hungry and completely worn out. He had to put on some clothes first, though. When he went all out, his clothes had not held up. Fortunately, there was plenty of rumble to hide behind at first, and Momo made him a pair of shorts. At the moment, that was all she could make until she, too, ate and replaced her limpets. All he wanted to do now was lie down, get some food, and take a shower. He was frightened by something more than the leader of the villains when he entered his room. With just a towel and a smile on her face, Stacy stood in the center of his room. She released the towel after saying, "I came to thank you for saving my dad." Her only clothing now was a sensual smile. Then he heard someone behind him gasp. Mina was the one. Mina found Izuku standing in the room with a nude girl in front of him, intending to check on him. She growled and turned, her eyes stinging with tears, firmly thinking that he was unfaithful to her. He zipped ahead of her before she could take 2 steps. Desperately, Izuku said, "Mina, please. It is not what it seems." She was about to tell him that she would never want to see him again as she gave him a fierce look. That they had finished. Then she stopped moving. Mina realized what that meant when she said, "The warning. You said that my future self said that it is not your fault." She gave him a look. He shook his head, saying, "You would never cheat on me, would you?" Mina took Izuku's hand in hers and he said, "No, never. I love you, Mina, with all my heart." As she made her way back to the room, she saw the blonde with the pink and purple stripes re-putting on her clothes. The girl snarled, "Get the fuck out. Come near my Izzy ever again and you and me are going to have a problem," and hurried off. Mina grinned at him as she closed the door and locked it. He looked at her in disbelief as she whispered, "Take off your clothes." Izuku swallowed hard and said, Wait. Your future self said it would be a special moment, but we weren't going to." Mina ushered him to the bed and pushed him onto it, saying, "She probably lied." A second later, I joined him. In the direction of the east, 2 hazy lines moved across the ocean's open water. Matthew Midoriya asked, "So where are we going, Gramps?" And his ancestor turned to face him. Izuku Midoriya remarked, "You got to stop calling me that." Before laughing, he discovered that in order to access the Speed Force, he needed to focus on it. "We are just out for a morning jog. Now that I know about the Speed Force and what I have to do to access it, I can keep myself from accidentally going into the future or past." Even so, it wasn't really him who caused him to access it and enter the future the first time. However, the explosion's energy propelled him into the future. An abundance of various forms of energy was produced by a near-atomic explosion that occurred that close. The Speed Force is one of them. When they arrived at a small island in the middle of the Pacific, they halted their run. They stood there looking out at the ocean from the beach. Izuku nodded in response to Matthew's question, "Can I ask you something?" Matthew started to kick the sand in front of him aimlessly as Izuku answered, "Sure. I kind of thought there was something. Since you asked if we could go for a run this morning before I go out with Mina for the day. With me stuck here in what was my past. Which is not really my past anymore, not with you not being killed by Zayn. Everything is different from what my dad told me, so I have no idea what I should do. Due to that with what I learned is completely different." Matthew sighed. "You see, my dad told me it is extremely important that I do not change the past if I went into it. But here I changed it. Even though according to my mom the past was altered by Zayn way before I altered it. Can you understand what I am saying?" Izuku looked perplexed. "Man, quantum mechanics gives me a headache." "Okay, so what I am asking is now that I am here. I know I am not the Flash anymore and instead I am Impulse. You think it is alright if... Well, if I want to ask Momo Yaoyuruzu out." He said the final word and Izuku laughed. Izuku grinned. I do not see why not. He recalled what Mina had told him. That Momo had grudgingly acknowledged that she kind of liked Matthew during one of the girl chat sessions. To prevent him from telling Matthew, she swore him to secrecy. A few more seconds later, Izuku gestured to the west. They both nodded and sprinted off again. "We better get back. I do have a date with Mina in about an hour and I cannot be late." Gliding effortlessly across the salty ocean water. However, they were both aware that Izuku could move much more quickly if he so desired. After 10 or 12 minutes, they finally arrived at the coastline, where they slowed to a more manageable pace. When they got back to the dorms, Izuku bounded into his room and Matthew into his. The date. On Izuku's back, Mina remarked, "This is awesome." When he recommended that they have lunch at a Chinese restaurant, the idea that her boyfriend would take them to China was not something Mina had anticipated. She thought it was fantastic when he ran on water and that he could do more than that. But to travel almost anywhere in a short period of time. He was only running quickly enough to avoid sinking into the water, though. Not wanting the pressures of going all out or any faster to get to her. Izuku said worriedly, "We should be there in about another 20 minutes. How are you doing?" And Mina gripped him more tightly. Mina looked at the plexi-plastic barrier that Izuku had strapped onto his shoulders, which created a curved triangle shield in front of anyone he carried behind him. Great. The barrier that Mei Hatsume made is working perfectly. I barely feel the breeze. Mina, for example. As they zipped along, she could see clearly ahead. Although he was still unable to move at full speed, he was no longer concerned that the stressors would cause Mina pain or tear her clothing to shreds. She gave him a smile. Izuku returned her smile and said, "Like to know there, Izzy. What else do you have planned today for our date?" Mina gave a little pout when Izuku said, "Not telling. I want this date to be special. Though just being with you is special enough for me." Mina grinned and said, "Sappy. Lucky for you. I adore Sappy." Izuku nearly fell on a tiny wave when she said, "Any chance that means tonight you will be sneaking into my room?" In the meantime, he turned a vivid red. She laughed. Izuku blushed with embarrassment once more as she said, "Come on, Izzy. We have done that quite a bit lately. Where we spend the night together. Though the other day in the closet." It was barely noon. He had never heard of or known that Mina enjoyed the aspect of their relationship that they now engaged in more frequently. Even so, he enjoyed spending the night with her. All night long, she would cling to him and cuddle. That was in a single word. Fantastic. Something he didn't want to stop. Izuku stammered, "I do not have any. I ran out last night and I have been too embarrassed to go and get any more." Mina laughed once more. Mina told him, "That is all right. I got plenty of those certain things in my room." Izuku took a big swallow. He blushed even more when she said, "So, you are spending the night tonight and we are going to, you know." In an attempt to shift the conversation, Izuku blurted out, "Oh look, there is China. Dining at a restaurant called Chang's." A fortune cookie was picked up by each of the young couple. As they both opened their cookies, he said, a little uneasy, "You know fortune cookies are actually something added from the United States." Mina smiled warmly and even gave Izuku a wink, saying, "I know. But who cares? Let's see mine says. The love of your life is right in front of your eyes." "Oh, that is a good one because it is true." He reddened once more. He glanced at his own when she asked, "What does yours say?" Izuku said sheepishly, I think I got a dud. It is so weird." Mina reached forward and removed the small piece of paper from his grasp. She gave him a smile. Mina returned it to him, and they both chuckled. "You might be right. This is just a fortune cookie. It can't tell the real future." Mina said, "Only you could get something like that." She broke up his fortune and threw it into the nearby ashtray. As they left the restaurant, they held hands and grinned broadly at one another until a middle-aged man nearly ran them over. "Those apartments over there are on fire. Someone needs to call the fire rescue." Izuku looked off in the direction the man had indicated, then back at Mina, who rolled her yellow eyes and nodded. The man in panic said into the restaurant as he hurried inside to make sure someone had called them. Mina told him, "Go ahead. Just be careful, okay?" Izuku grinned back at her. "Be back in a..." Mina touched Izuku's lips with her right index finger before he could utter his new catchphrase. Izuku laughed and released her left hand as Mina said sharply, "Don't say it." Then he blurred away. Mina let out an audible groan as Izuku said, in a flash, "I detest it when he says that. What a corny sound." "But please be careful, Izzy," Mina said as she looked at the burning building. Reaching the apartment building, Izuku prioritized what he needed to do within a second. Streaking to each apartment door, he vibrated himself inside each one and checked to make sure there was no one there. Vibrating himself then into the next apartment. When he found someone, he sped them outside along with any pets within. All the residents could tell was 1 second or actually a quarter second they were inside their apartment and the next they were out on the street. It took him less than 5 minutes to do that for all 58 apartments. The problem with him doing that was that it wore him out some when he vibrated his molecules that much. So after a 22-second breather, The next thing he did was use whatever fire extinguishers he could find to contain the fire until the local fire corps could arrive. He had considered creating a vortex around the building and basically sucking the flames out, but the collateral damage would be too excessive. So he did what he could with the fire extinguishers, and by the time the corps arrived they were able to put out the fire within an hour. Speeding back to Mina, he slumped with his hands on his knees, partially out of breath. Izuku went back inside the restaurant, sat at the table, and looked at the menu again. The owner and the waiter from earlier came over. "Phew. I am starving," Izuku said to Mina as he caught his breath. The owner grinned and said, "Order whatever and how much you want, young man. It is on me." As Izuku started to place the order, Mina said, "Thank you." "No, I and everyone else here must thank him. Many of us have friends and family who reside there." Izuku ate as much as 8 people could, and the owner watched with delight as he said, "So like I said, it is on me." An hour later, Izuku ran again while carrying Mina on his back. Izuku laughed when she told him, "I noticed you skipped the fortune cookie this time." Izuku ran across the ocean's open waters, saying, "I'm not taking any chances on getting another weird one. How much trouble do you think I'm going to be in when Mr. Ivaza finds out what I did?" Izuku asked. Mina laughed as he asked again. "A great deal, especially since we just all got our provisional licenses." Mina replied, though she was not too worried about what Ivaza would say or what punishment he would bestow upon Izuku. She did worry that once more the press and media would continue to suggest that Izuku should be just licensed as a full-fledged hero and have him no longer attend UA. In her mind she selfishly did not want him to do that. She liked seeing him every day, and if he did get licensed then at most she would get to see him on weekends at most. "So, now what else do you have planned for our date?" He turned his head and grinned as she asked with great interest. As soon as his feet touched the dry land of Japan again, Izuku told her, "Well, after we get to UA. Change into something more casual. Then I will show you." He then slowed down and headed straight for the UA campus and their dormitory, where they both changed in their rooms. He waited for Mina to join him, and when she did, he exclaimed, "Mina. That is no way casual." As he gazed at her, he said, and Mina gave him a cheeky smile. Mina stepped forward and said, "Sure it is. What do you dislike?" He shook his head in response to her question as he gaped at her. "That is not what I'm saying," Izuku responded. "I would never say that," after glancing at her outfit. Mina had chosen to wear a modified casual outfit, which included a knee-length skirt with blue and white stripes and a matching V-neck, sleeveless blouse that exposed a lot of her pink cleavage and was nearly skin-tight. She stepped closer, placing her forearms over his shoulders, and kissed him, kissing him on the lips before pressing their foreheads together. "You are so beautiful, Mina," he whispered, and Mina gave him a warm smile. "Maybe we could do it tomorrow instead of whatever you had planned," Mina whispered back. "I really want my boyfriend, whom I truly love, to come up to my room and spend the rest of the day and night with me right now." She then reached down and took both of his hands in hers. "I suppose," Izuku responded, since all I had planned was for us to go to a movie, and allowed her to lead the way back inside, up the stairs, and directly to her room. She locked the door and turned on the radio after entering because she was aware that Kyoko had a habit of listening in on some of the others, including herself and Izuku, and she did not want her friend to eavesdrop on their plans for the remainder of the day and a few times tonight. Issues with training. Ivaza was stumped on what hero training he could assign 2 speedsters. All he could think of was to have them continue to practice with their abilities and try to discover new ways to use their speed. Having no real clue what the speed force was or how it was humanly possible for either of them to vibrate their molecules to pass through solid objects, or be able to create speed turbines that to him looked like tornadoes. As for the others, he just went with the normal curriculum that had worked for him from the past. Though he did have another problem with one of the speedsters, in the form of that Izuku Midoriya and Mina Ishido being a couple. It sort of motivated the others in the class to want to be in a similar relationship with each other. He knew teenagers would be teenagers, still he frowned upon that type of interaction between his students. That was all he could actually do. He could not outwardly stop them or even order them to no longer be a couple. Mainly due to that principal, Nezu had changed the rules about francization between students on UA campus grounds. To that it being allowed as long as the PDA was not overly conducted. Though what really made it difficult for him to cope with was that an extremely popular teen magazine was really focused on the budding relationship between the 2 teenagers. Pictures, articles, and to his dismay there on his desk was a request from the magazine to interview the 2 teenagers. Of course, to his frustration, Principal Nezu and Nomori Kayama were agreeable to allowing the interview, believing it would really provide some much-needed positive public relations. To him, though, it was not something he believed should be acceptable. Then he remembered a conversation when he suggested that the two end their relationship and had to wonder what Izuku Midoriya had meant about the future cannot be changed. Or rather should not be altered. That confused him. So he asked the young man to elaborate. The boy's answer really confused him until he remembered how Zayn had come back to alter the future, and then it made partial sense. That is enough for today, he said, ending his musings and thoughts as he had the entire Class 1A stop their training. He had not really paid much attention to any of them as he stood there, and from what he could tell, all of them had worked hard. Walking back inside, he glanced over and noticed the two teenagers were idly talking. From what he could overhear, they were discussing possible double-date plans with Momo Yaoyorozu and Matthew Midoriya. Crap, he muttered, another two that I need to stress over, and sulkily walked into the main building, where he was in dire need of a nap. Ivaza was unaware that after Matthew asked Momo out, the two went and practically pleaded with Izuku and Mina to go on their date because neither of them understood what it meant to go on a real date with someone of the other sex. Problems occur. Remain silent. Muscular roared as he attempted to hit Izuku Midoriya once more while his two cohorts tried to stop the other speedster from slicing around them. He had thought of robbing the bank they had just left, but now everything was going completely wrong in his mind. He looked over and saw his cohort Emiko Toga slash with one of her knives where the other once was and miss completely. He knew she had come with the promise of just causing chaos and slaughter, but not for the money that, when they left the bank, disappeared right out of his grasp, bag and all. Dobby said, "This has gone all wrong." He fired another blast of his blue fire, which the young man easily avoided. Muscular was furious that the two blurry children who seemed to move so quickly and avoid his blows were talking about something unrelated to the fight they were in. Roaring once more, he slammed his fist where the one was a second ago and missed. In a flash, Matthew dodged Toga's knife slash and said, "This is not what I would call a good start of my first date with Momo." He then shoved her, causing her to stumble backwards into Dobby. "Well, blame these morons. I thought going to the mall across the street would be a good place for you and Momo to have your first date," Izuku said, glancing over in a 1/100th of a second to make sure both Mina and Momo were dealing with crowd control and keeping the civilians out of harm's way. When the four of them stumbled upon the bank robbery by Muscular, Dobby and Toga. It took a few minutes to convince Mina and Momo to let he and Matthew deal with them. Thankfully, the two girls had to agree that they basically did not stand much of a chance against all three of the villains. So that left them keeping the civilians safe and doing crowd control until the police and pro-heroes arrived. "When we get done with their idiots, then instead how about we go somewhere else?" he said as he again avoided Muscular's blow, then grabbed the sinewy arm of the brute and spun around so fast that Muscular turned in a whirling blur. Izuku released him and the villain flew a good 20 meters, slamming into and through a brick wall. The huge man roared as he got up and charged once more at Izuku. With a simple side step, he tripped Muscular and the other fell onto his chest and face with a thud. "I'm going to tear you to pieces." It took a good 5 minutes before Dobby realized that he and Matthew were merely keeping them busy until some pro-heroes arrived, which was all that was permitted by the provisional license. Muscular roared in rage, and Izuku shook his head, amazed at how foolish these villains were. "Whoa, they are merely playing tricks on us." Dobby looked around and said, "Keeping us here until some heroes get here." Toga then realized what the two speedsters had been up to, and that the one she and Dobby were trying to kill could have easily defeated and subdued them at any moment with little effort. Toga snarled in embarrassment as she nearly tripped over her shoes after someone tied their strings together. "We need to get the fuck out of here before they do get here. None of you are leaving." As he sped past the two, Matthew said, "Now, how about being a good psycho and just surrender?" He glanced over at his ancestor and watched for a moment as Izuku performed the same move he had done earlier, spinning the big Muscular around himself before letting go to slam the brute into another concrete wall, this time face first. "You know, Gramp. Izuku, I really would rather continue my date with Momo than deal with these idiots," Matthew said. "Can we just get this done and hope that we don't run into any problems later?" Izuku shrugged in response to his question. "Getting into trouble with Mina is what worries me the most. She dislikes it when I do something risky or, in her opinion, incredibly stupid. However, yes." Muscular began to laugh as Izuku retorted, "Go ahead and tie those two up and I will deal with this big moron. I battled All Might, but you might be able to avoid me. I doubt you could do anything to take me down. WWWWWW. Before Muscular could finish, the boy grabbed him and partially picked him up. Then all he felt was the sudden acceleration and severe gust of breeze against him for about a good minute. He had blinked several times, and when he finally could see other than the blurs passing him by, he stared about wide-eyed. Where the fuck? He looked around and saw that he was on a small island with the ocean all around it. The boy, who was grinning and had his arms folded across his chest, was about 15 feet away. Izuku continued to smile as he said, "There are plenty of coconuts over there and someone should come retrieve you sooner or later." He then stopped, saying, "I would suggest you not try to fight me again. For next time I will drop you off on either the North or South Pole." He then drove off, leaving Muscular completely stunned as he depowered. When Izuku returned to the scene, he discovered that Matthew had successfully tied Himiko, Toga and Dabi in several hundred feet of rope that he had borrowed from a nearby hardware store. The two looked like a huge ball of yarn with them inside the yellow corded rope. As she and Mina got closer, Momo said, "You know, no one can say that our first date is not memorable. Let me tell you about my first date with Izzy sometime." Mina, who was holding Izuku's left hand in her right, said, "It involved armed terrorists and a series of movies that we have only been able to see half of them." She grinned, and after explaining what had happened for about 30 minutes, during which Muscular would be waiting for someone to arrest him while he was bound in what looked like a huge ball of yarn, the four of them left to continue their double date, not particularly worried about the lecture they would likely receive later from Iwaza, Nomori, or both. As he and Shota Iwaza stood apart, Toshinori Yagi remarked, "Okay. Let's see what you two have come up with." Partially hidden by a protective barrier that is resistant to acid, Mina exhaled deeply, hoping she wouldn't throw herself while showcasing the new move she and Izuku had devised. She hoped that this time she wouldn't have, as she had the previous 3 times they had practiced. It was difficult not to. Mina nodded curtly, "Okay, Izzy, I think I am ready." Izuku nodded once more and clasped both sides of her waist. He started spinning her in a circle. At first, she was only moving quickly enough to lift her feet off the ground. She waited with her arms extended until he turned her around at the appropriate time. Everything was a blur as she stopped focusing on not throwing up after being whirled around. A moderate amount of corrosive acid was released by her. All that was visible to Yagi and Iwaza was the acidic liquid that poured out around the two teenagers. As soon as he released Mina, Izuku slowed. She covered her mouth with her right hand and sagged to her knees. She willed herself not to vomit. Iwaza nodded in agreement as Toshinori remarked, "That is quite interesting, though I do not know any situations that such a maneuver would be used for." Izuku put a comforting hand on Mina's right shoulder and remarked, "There is a couple I can think of." She waited for the nausea and vertigo to subside enough so she could at least speak while she sat there with her eyes closed. She was afraid she would throw up if she opened her mouth. He said, for example, with a very low corrosive acid, she could put out a fire. The teacher, who was also a pro hero, nodded slowly. The two nodded once more as he continued, "Then what about if there is a situation where we are surrounded by criminals?" Assuming that Mina would be essentially defenseless if she needed to recuperate from the effects of being spun around, Iwaza proposed, "You will have to work on it so that Miss Ashido does not feel ill right after conducting that maneuver. Otherwise I would suggest until then, not using it." As Izuku helped her up, Mina finally said, "We will." She faltered a little and had to rely on her boyfriend to keep her from falling back to the ground. To demonstrate that she and Izuku should be more than just a couple, she was prepared to go to almost any lengths. A hero team, too. The only way the two had come up with to combine her acid quirk with his speed so far was that spinning maneuver. But only until they could think of something else. They would practice this one until she could get used to the sensation of being whirled around so quickly that it made her feel lightheaded and queasy. They returned to join the other members of Class 1A with Izuku's assistance. Toshinori shook his head negatively and stated, "I don't think it will work, not completely. But right now I believe that Miss Ashido and Mr. Midoriya are desperate to find a way for their different powers to work together." As he went to watch some of the other students from class who were trying to think of a signature move, Iwaza remarked, "As stubborn as those two are, I know they will think of something." As he did, he considered the possible combination of Mina's acid and Izuku's speed for a signature partner move. "I can't really think of anything right now." Mina leaned back against Izuku's back as he sat behind her, and the lightheadedness gradually disappeared. From the beginning, she was aware that maneuver was a failure. She was also aware that she would never be able to adjust to being whirled around at that speed without experiencing the consequences both during and after. Night. Well, after I can eat without worrying about being sick. At dinner let's discuss some of those other ideas we had come up with, he replied to her. After saying, yeah, I think that might be a good idea, Izuku looked at Matthew and thought about asking him. However, he later recalled that his and Mina's distant relative was from a future in which Zayn had murdered him prior to their attempts to form a hero team. He would ask even though he didn't think Matthew would know what they could try, in case the other speedster did have any potentially useful ideas. A movie and dinner. Tonight's plans included going to a movie and having dinner, but those plans fell through. Izuku and Mina descended the stairs with the intention of attending a movie and dinner. Tenya Iida, who was standing at the door, stopped them. The class president stood firmly with his arms crossed in front of him and said, "There is a new rule established that requires that you sign out, with where you are going and expected time of return." Izuku grinned as he asked, "Have either of you signed out with Mr. Ivaza?" "Not yet," Izuku answered, then vanished for a moment before reappearing. Tenya frowned as he said, "There I have signed out." Tenya grudgingly moved away from the door as Mina said, "With that done. Can you get out of the way? I want to go out with my boyfriend." Mina stepped outside and turned to face the dormitory main entrance. "Man. Iida needs to get the stick out of his ass. So there is a new rule. I bet he suggested it to Ivaza about us having to sign out," she said with an air of disdain. Then she grinned. She giggled and said, "Next time, let's just zip right by him." I could almost picture Iida's annoyance if Izuku simply drove by him so quickly that the other person wouldn't have time to voice any complaints. Mina shook her head when Izuku said, "You know we should have stayed and tried to come up with our combined signature maneuver instead of going out." After they left the campus, Mina grabbed his right hand in her left and responded, "No way, Izzy. Like I told Mr. Stick in the Mud, I want to go out with my boyfriend. We can brainstorm tomorrow about that maneuver." She entwined her fingers with his. They could be a couple inside the dorms, holding hands and cuddling on the dayroom couch. However, they had to wait until they left the campus to even hold hands because they were required to abide by the no open displays of affection rules while on campus. That was something she detested. Since they were now compelled to live on campus, she actually hoped that her letter to Principal Nezu would result in the amendment of those rules. In an attempt to get him to hint at what he had planned for that day, she said, "Sue, my birthday is in about a week." "Oh, that's right. It is, isn't it?" Izuku grinned broadly. Izuku shook his head when Mina asked, "Can you at least give me a hint on what you were planning?" Mina was not pleased with Izuku's response. "Nope. I want it to be a surprise. He had been gone for nearly the entire day last week, and she had to wonder what he was doing that would need him to be gone for so long. Based on her knowledge, he could complete 3 or 4 laps around the planet in that amount of time." He ended his statement about his plans by saying, "I will tell you that you are going to love it. Trust me." Momo and Matthew were going on a separate date at the same time. He had to meet her parents for this one. In an attempt to calm him down, she said that since she had already met his parents, it was only right that he meet hers. However, his resembled distant grandparents more. He was still anxious. He felt like he was going to throw up because of this. Surprise birthday. Mina spent a few minutes massaging the cramps in her arms and legs after they had arrived in the United States an hour or so earlier. Even so, the trip, or rather, California, took only about an hour. The entire time she was riding on Izuku's back, her arms and legs had started to tingle. She was able to move without flinching once they were cleared by customs. As she gazed around in amazement, she said, "Okay. This is. I cannot believe we are in Hollywood." He grinned and shook his head when she asked, "Is this my special birthday present?" Izuku said, "Nope. Just wait." As they strolled along Rodeo Drive, as they approached one of the more upscale restaurants, they entered. Someone was already waiting at a table, so he escorted her there. Mina nearly passed out when she realized who it was. "Oh my god. Oh my god," Mina, staring at the person with wide eyes, gasped aloud at first. Izuku and the well-known actress both laughed at Mina's response, saying, "It is Sigourney Weaver." "Oh my god," she exclaimed. "You are Sigourney Weaver?" And the older woman gave her a nod. Sigourney said, "Yes, I know, and you are Mina Ishido. I heard from your boyfriend that you are a serious fan of the Alien movies." Mina gave a forceful nod, and Izuku helped her sit down across from the actress. Mina turned to face Izuku and said, "Yes, I am. In fact, I tried to have my hero name be Alien Queen. But it was shot down." She said to him, "How? How did you arrange this?" And Izuku grinned. After responding, Sigourney grinned at Izuku and said, "He did me a huge favor and afterwards only asked that I meet you on your birthday." Mina squeezed his hand tightly and declared, "You are the greatest boyfriend ever." She said, Can I ask what this favor was?" And Izuku and Sigourney both laughed. Oh, it was nothing really that big. I always wanted to see the North Pole, but you see, because it would take at least a couple of weeks to get there. He was able to take me there and back within a couple of hours, Sigourney said to her, and Mina nodded. The other older woman grinned as Mina giggled and said, that is true. Though I have to wonder why you would want to go to the North Pole. Were you trying to see if Santa's workshop is real or not? Sigourney laughed, followed a few seconds later by Mina and Izuku. Yes and no, it is not a place that is easy to go to, and I just always wanted to actually see it with my own eyes. Izuku said, it was cold as hell there, and even with my special clothes, I felt the cold. The waiter then came over. After the three placed their orders, Mina started inquiring about the roles played by well-known actresses in the Alien films. The Alien Queen in particular. The autographed copy of the Blu-ray 4 movie disc set was still firmly in hand several hours later. Mina gave her boyfriend a warm smile. As he raced across the ocean, she rode on his back and told him, I love this Izzy. Like I said, you are the greatest boyfriend ever. Izuku said, leaning toward the Hawaiian Islands, I'm glad you enjoyed it. The location where they would pause to rest and eat. Grinning, she pressed her lips to his right ear. He nearly stumbled on a non-existent wave as Mina whispered, you are so getting laid tonight, and then blew into his ear. Jump in time. 2 years. Mina packed her clothes into one of her bags and went to her room. Izuku packed her collectibles and mementos into a box, saying, you know, if you folded and packed your clothes, then you might be able to fit more in those bags. She gave him a smile. Mina responded, tempted to point out that he had cheated and packed everything in his room in a matter of seconds, takes too much effort and time. He could do that with her belongings, but she had insisted on doing it the way she always did. She didn't want to mistreat any of her valuable collectibles. For instance, how many glass and ceramic figurines of her favorite alien characters she owns. Before they were a couple, she had some and he had given her others. She kept packing her clothes into a bag while he wrapped each one in bubble paper. By the door, 2 more had already been filled and zipped shut. She pulled something out of her closet and held it up. Izuku blushed as she said, oh, look at this. It is the teddy I bought and wore for your birthday last year. Recalling the occasion when she had given him that as a kind of birthday present, before carefully placing it in the bag to avoid tearing the black, nearly see-through material, she said, I think when we get moved into our apartment, I will have to wear this again for you. Then he saw his lopsided smile as he pictured her wearing that lingerie once more. His expression made her laugh. He flushed once more when she asked, are you remembering the last time I wore this? Izuku grinned at her and Mina grinned back, saying, sorry, can't help it. You looked so incredible in that. I mean, wow. You were so sexy and... Wow. They wouldn't need to sneak around to have sex after tonight. They would not be in danger of being discovered by Mr. Iwaza or Tenya Iida. Admiring the diamond ring on her ring finger, she glanced down at her left hand. Recalling the moment he asked her to marry him just over 2 months ago. Which resulted in a lecture from their teacher and some serious frowning from their teacher, Iwaza. However, he was genuinely powerless to stop them. After all, despite not having received their UA degrees yet, they were both older than 18. Both of them were chosen to join 2 distinct hero agencies after graduating yesterday. Choosing to heed Best Jeanist's advice not to be partners or attend the same agency. As a result, neither of them would focus on being heroes because they would be too preoccupied with the other. Izuku was going to the newly reformed Might Tower agency, which was now run by Gang Orca, and Mina had been hired as a sidekick at the Ryukyu Hero office. With Kamiya Woods and Mount Lady, as well as senior sidekick Mirio Tagata. The Hero Administration had determined that Vanguard Action Squad was similar to the League of Villains. It was necessary for heroes to have a squad consisting of some of the most powerful heroes. You know, you got lucky, by the way. When my dad found out that we were, you know, he wanted to inflict a lot of pain onto you. But when we told him we are getting married, he sort of chilled out and no longer wanted to kill you, Mina said as she was packing up. As he taped the final box shut, Izuku remarked, yeah, well, my mom started to cry and remember she kept accusing you that you seduced me. After that, he quickly picked up 2 boxes and drove off. A few seconds later, he came back to take 2 more. There were no boxes or bags in Mina's former dorm room when he was done. They were all in their apartments now, a few miles away. She shook her head and laughed. Before taking one last glance around her room to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything, Mina said, that is so cheating. But I guess it makes it easier than how everyone else has to do it. This room held many memories for her. He had most of them with him. Despite this, she also spent a lot of time in his room and made memories there. She could not wait to finally leave, but she also knew that she would miss being here. She knew her hero career would not last long based on what she could see of Izuku. She was aware that she would be retiring in a few years. She made the decision to do the best she could until then. She took his right hand in her left and moved toward the door, saying, "Well, Izzy, I guess it's time to go say goodbye to everyone." The two then went downstairs to meet up with their classmates. They would most likely see some of them occasionally. Others, however, they may not see for a long time, because they were traveling to agencies outside of the city. They both unpacked their belongings in their new apartment. The majority of it was done by Izuku, who moved quickly through the one-bedroom apartment. Mina had once more said that he was unfaithful, but didn't mean it because they would have done it normally. Unpacking and storing everything would take at least 6 or 7 hours. Therefore, she didn't really complain all that much. She was eager to spend some genuine alone time with him, after all. The gradual decline of Minoru Mineta. Minoru was grinning as he sat in front of his computer in his own apartment across the city. He was astounded by the enormous demand and the price that those who were interested would be willing to pay. He posted some of his photos after clicking on them, and soon after, perverts all over the world started paying hefty sums of money for them. It's true that all of them were just sexy photos he took of his female classmates. There was nothing seedy about any of them. A few of the pictures featured the 5 girls wearing regular civilian clothes, while others featured them in swimsuits or bikinis. However, none of them were illuminating. There were still a lot of people who were interested in them. Taking care not to post any of Mina's Shido, he muttered, "I guess they're perfect spank bank material." Not wanting to provoke the anger or retaliation of Izuku Midoriya. A little concerned that by sharing Momo Yaoyorozu's pictures, he might incite Michael Midoriya's wrath. However, he chose to take the chance because of the high demand for those. Yes, there was also a demand for Mina's. He refused to risk anything. Just in case. Both the money and the requests for more kept coming in. Weeks later, as the exotic dancer danced sensuously on stage, Minoru gazed at her with wide eyes and intense lust as she removed her clothes. One of his favorite spots to go after a demanding workday was the Black Cat X. For him, the majority of his day was dull. He had turned into a hero in order to win over the ladies, and up until now, all he had done was live in Death Arms, the agency leader's shadow. Patrolling alongside the pro-hero leader and essentially doing nothing else. Therefore, there was no way that any of the ladies could genuinely notice him and then swoon over him. The girls did not actually harm him even in this situation. The majority of them were more drawn to people who were obviously wealthy and could afford to lavish lavishes on the dancers. He realized what he needed to do at that point. Since being a hero did not really grant him what he most desired, he needed money. Power and money would. Feeling sexually and completely let down, he stood up and went home. Minoru discovered 2 months after he made the decision to acquire wealth and power that, if one did not mind the process, it was actually quite simple. He started by just going after the local pimps. He found and identified the majority of them using the police records, which were accessible to the Death Arms agency. Then, creating the evidence that the police needed to arrest them was equally simple. His next move was to use the internet to find pimps' girls to work for him. When they learned that he was a Death Arms sidekick, they all agreed. Thinking that he could protect them more effectively than their previous boss could. Which he carried out. However, he employed some of the borderline thugs as protection, so it once more called upon his connections through the police department. More money started coming in now, and to top it all off, he could play with some of his employees whenever he wanted. This time, unlike the last time, he was unable to even hire a prostitute because they were worried that he would catch them. He was a hero sidekick, after all. However, they did not reject him at this time. He was able to essentially hide his identity thanks to the internet. They were all unaware that he was in command. They were only aware of the fact that he was a sidekick. After a year, Minoru reviewed all of his secret accounts and records. He discovered that he had more money than he knew how to spend. He still desired more. Much more. He hadn't advanced to hero, primarily because he wasn't like his former classmates. He remained only a sidekick. He grinned and clicked on the internal website. He thought it was amusing that he had access to the agency's operating capital because he was a sidekick. Therefore, he sent 1% to one of his secret accounts after making a small adjustment. A few days later, Death Arms and the others did not question him or catch him. He sent more. Then persisted in pilfering an increasing amount into his accounts every month. Since he made up a few fictitious expenses and deductions that no one would really notice, it was equally simple. He used that money to covertly purchase and acquire the Black Cat X. Nearly 4 years later, Minoru Mineta was waiting for his dinner guest to arrive at a restaurant. He was a little taken aback that Mina Ishido Midoriya would approach him for a conversation. But if she wanted to sleep with him, he wasn't going to refuse the opportunity. Since her popular and pro-hero husband was too busy to spend time with her, he wanted to think that she might be lonely. She was coming over for dinner, and maybe more. However, his fantasies of getting between her legs vanished once she got there. She wanted to discuss working for him with him. She wanted enough money so that she and Izuku could purchase a home. In the hopes that she might eventually fall for his charms, he hired her. He was, after all, incredibly wealthy and powerful. He later learned that she had deceived him, and he never lets anyone do that to him. No longer. He therefore instructed Himiko Toga to remove Mina Ishido before she could testify and sentence him to prison for the next 20 or so years while he was waiting for his court date in a jail cell. She was still a little worried that her husband might get even if it was found out that he had ordered her assassination. However, he had ensured that only Himiko knew he had hired her. However, he hired Dabi to set up a specific accident to happen at least 50 miles away in order to ensure that Izuku would not get involved. In order to guarantee that Matthew Midoriya would have to respond, it was simultaneously planned for the other speedster to be distracted by a fire. Later, much to his disgust and dismay, as he sat prepared for his trial, he learned that Himiko had failed because another speedster had come and prevented Mina's murder. Minoru Mineta was ultimately sentenced to 26 years in prison without the chance of release.
So this was the end of the series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, bye bye.